Over. It's over.
Hey guys, it's been a little while. Well, not really, it's only been a week. Feels like a while for me though, because I've been waging, and it's been the first time I've had consistent full-time work in quite a while. You know, it makes me sound a little bit like a like some kind of vagrant or whatever, but the situation is just that bad up here that it's almost like a point of celebration where you can make a full-time paycheck. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we just went into recession up here in the last quarter, because the last quarter the GDP contracted by 0.1%, which, you know, it's actually been that bad for several years now, but it's been masked with immigration. But now that we've hit the breaking point and they're starting to stop population growth, they've stopped approving. They haven't even sent anyone home yet. That's the crazy part. They haven't even sent anyone home yet, but already the economy is contracting because it's so dependent on this biomass importing, this biomass growth. So anyways, this mini rant to start off the stream about Leafistan. Let me just catch up to see if I missed anything in the live chat. Hey, Gultist. Hey, I hate food. Mike Literacer. I'm not going to say that out, just in case. And Sig Nielsen. She locked her iPhone charger in her car again. Listen, here's an old cell. And by the way, this is the void we're talking about. But this is, you know you're an old cell if you remember where Ann Hero came from. Ann Hero came from this kid, his name's on the tip of my tongue, but he's this, his iPod was stolen from him or something, and he committed gotta be careful what I say, caught myself. He self-deleted over it, and it became a big meme because someone left a comment on his online obituary saying he was N Hero. It was like some broken English or something. So it's quite funny. And this void has done something similar here. As a matter of fact, it's quite difficult to figure out what exactly she offed herself over. It's like some people have claimed that it was over a guy, or like in some Chad or whatever that pumped and dumped her. But we actually have some footage from her Instagram, which purports to be the boyfriend. And the boyfriend in question looks like this. Let's see here. So there's one picture. And here's another picture. And here is a third picture that is the best shot. So we might have to bring the cognizant manlet on at some point and admit to him that height is king, because apparently the only thing this guy had going for him was his height. He's very peculiar. But I suspect that whole story is confabulated. We don't know why some of these people will self-delete. I suspect, and I remember reading this in an X post, and it's unfortunate that I didn't save it because it was very well put, but I'll paraphrase it, that there's a certain class of highly dramatic people, they're mostly women, that have conditions like borderline personality disorder, and for them, self-deleting is almost like a form of dramatic imposition on other people. Like what actually gets them going is thinking about the emotional reaction that their self-deletion would cause everyone around them, especially if they have a following. It's a way of like generating self-worth from beyond the grave in some bizarre way. So there is actually a narcissistic element to self-deleting. Right? And it seems quite likely to me that this is the story with this woman, this chick. And she is pretty, let's be honest. And of course, when I saw this happen, I was immediately thinking, what is going to happen here? If there's some noise, it's because I have my window open right now. So I'm enjoying some air coming in. If there's too much noise or whatever, I'll close the window. It's kind of nice to get some wind through it up. So just let me know if there's any consistent noises. But anyways, I was expecting when this thing broke that this chick would have like an army of simps just crying about her and saying, nobody knew this was happening. Oh, how do we prevent this? Oh, this is such a tragedy. Oh, condolences for everyone affected. Oh, she was such an angel. Oh, we've lost so much. The exact opposite happened. There was actually this huge negative reaction. It was like a combination of hostility towards her, like realizing that this is just an attention game for her, even though she actually went through with it. And also that there's this prevailing expectation that, again, I had as well, that there would be an outpouring of sympathy. Simp spelled S-I-M-P in this case. That's not what happened at all. And I think this is indicating to me, along with a few other stories that I want to look at, this is indicating to me that there is a marked shift in how, at least online, guys are perceiving women and women as a victim group. Well, there's only so much you can draw from online, because it is true when people say that online is not reality, that maybe it's only like a tiny fraction, maybe it's like 10-15% of people that are plugged into these kind of spheres. The fact is that this 10 or 15% is also typically the 10 or 15% that's above the average person in intelligence and in awareness on current things. Like, these are the people that tend to set trends that trickle down into the future, which is what we saw with wokeism. That's what we saw with inkydom. I mean, we were talking, the stuff that was being talked about in 2017 is now going mainstream. And I'm talking about like when brain cells was the thing. If any of you guys remember Reddit brain cells, I actually have the archive of Reddit brain cells from 2017 to 2019, because I believe it got banned in 2019. I actually have the archive of that entire period. And it'll see if you guys can figure out. Maybe I'll upload it at some point. You guys can try and figure out which one of the posters is me, because I had one viral post, actually. Is the clip loud? All right. Hang on, let me catch up on the text here. Greetings. Were you streaming in a construction zone? Oh, is it the clip making noise? Oh, hang on. I think I actually have it muted. Hold on. Maybe that's... Was I having to talk over that? No. Okay, I see. Oh, that was weird. All right. My bad. Okay, we got it. All right. Sorry about that. How much of my talk was blanked out by that? Was I legible, or do I need to repeat anything, do you think? Okay. So I probably don't need to repeat myself. All right. We'll go with that. Anyways, if you click the quote page, it's actually quite interesting. Look, we got heads up here from Mads. Heads up. Yeah, I'm a brainlet. Mads, please report this account. I'm sure it's devastating for her loved ones to go through this filth of replies and quotes. May she rest in peace. Oh. And then let's see what we got here. This is one of the biggest replies. Mr. Melancholy. NGL will never understand why a person who looks like this will take their own life. You're literally God's chosen person. Half the planet will give their little pinky to be with you, and you end it all just like that. Maybe a severe mental illness or trauma, else makes no sense. Yeah, dibs on the body. We denounce this because this is a horrific abuse of the recently departed. We will not tolerate this kind of talk at all. But yeah, there was a lot of shit like that. And you have these women like pearl clutching and shrieking over it. Oh, look at what these men are saying. They're so horrible. It's like everybody's sick of this shit. Everybody knows that this was just a like this chick was probably not being like tormented or abused. And actually, what's funny about this is I remember when I first saw this and I was comparing it to what I was used to, I developed an understanding for why religions like Catholicism made self-deletion into a sin. The reason why self-deletion is a sin is because these sort of venal narcissistic people, and they're usually women, but people, because, well, actually, probably these kind of self-deletions are more common with men, because men in general are more successful at self-deletion. But it's these sort of things where they have no real reason, because as people are saying, she is in a completely different dimension from the rest of us who are having to scrimp and rot and just barely survive. And most of us would give an arm and a leg to be in that social position that she's in. Not necessarily to be women, but to be in the same social position she's in. And yet, because she has no vision of that, because she's so self-centered, she ends up self-deleting. You know? And it may be that she had a minor setback of some kind. You know, and I remember saying at the time, I was like, you know, these people are so soft and weak. You know that if there was any kind of real crisis or disaster, they would be completely useless. You know, they would be completely useless. They wouldn't be able to assist you in any kind of crisis scenario. And it's almost better for them to take care of themselves now, as opposed to becoming a burden at a real hardship, like if a real hardship happens. You know, and if I had to create a survivalist crew, it would be a bunch of stone cold Inkies. Because Inkies will stare into the void and have the void stare back at them, and that just becomes conditioning for their existence. Like, all the copes are torn away. All that's left is just your objective, naked existence. You know? Let me catch up here. Our lives are constant torment. Yeah, they are. Pixlers is her leak name. By the way, yeah. I have her Instagram. Somebody sent it to me. And it's funny because there are other claims that were being made about this woman. That, oh, she's actually has like body dysmorphia or something, right? Because this is one of the excuses that they'll use for these types of women. And they also do it for eating disorder women, whatever. Oh, it's body dysmorphia. She actually thinks she's hideous. But then when you actually look at her, she does nothing but take selfies after there's I think hundreds of selfies of this woman that she's taken. And of course, there's also several nudes. Okay, anybody who has actually experienced not body dysmorphia, but just perceiving themselves as being physically ugly, physically unattractive, they are going to avoid at all costs. They're going to avoid showing themselves physically. They're going to avoid pictures of themselves. They're going to avoid bringing attention to their physical appearance. This chick did nothing but post her physical appearance. There's no way. Hang on just a second. Yeah, there's no way. Anyways, just double checking something here. Okay. We are good. All right, let me see what else we can find here. There's another story I wanted to talk about. It's a little more of a racial story than a Foyd story, but the Foyds tie into it. And I think the way I want to do things is I want to take these individual scenarios, even if they're embedded in a certain context, like they're embedded in, say, the black-white conflict or some other conflict. There's still a general rule at play here, and I want to extract that from the scenario that's happening. And this is an example of what I'm talking about, or you'll see. Yeah, just because she won the genetic lottery doesn't mean she couldn't have had severe mental issues. Look, severe mental issues, what he's implying here is that she was so crazy that she just decided to rope because she had like a psychotic episode or something. That's not the case at all, right? It's just pure narcissism. It's vanity. And let me see what else we got here. Oh, most of these are... No, don't kill yourself. You're so sexy. Aha. Oh yeah, this is a Foyd. Okay, this is a Foyd. I've seen this comment repeated in another area, where she's implying here that how dare you think that you can prevent somebody from wanting to commit suicide because you're desiring them sexually. Like, oh, the horror. As a matter of fact, let me pull this up here. It's in here. Well, she was aware of clavicular, whatever that means. I should have saved this one. Oh, actually, I know where it is. Hold on. Just give me a moment here, guys. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about right here. These are the kind of posts you see. And then it just occurred to me, it's like, wow. I try to put this in a male context to understand it. So imagine you're a dude and you're like, oh, my life is so shit. I really want to end hero and rope. And all these women, they're giving me attention and validation. They're telling me that I have so much to live for. I'm so handsome. But you know what? They just want this D. That's what they want. They just want to get effed by me. I feel so like a piece of meat due to how they perceive me. Oh, this is so horrendous. You know, it doesn't resolve my mental issues, my mental illness, which is completely inexplicable. I just happen to be mentally ill for some reason, and there's no way, like there's no connection to personal validation by other people desiring me and wanting me to be in, even just be in their presence, right? Because I guarantee you this chick, there's plenty of guys who just want her to be in their presence, not even necessarily like romantically even or snuggly, but just so that they're there, because like beautiful girls being around places improves the perception of the place. People like interacting with them. They like seeing them in places. They just improve. Like everywhere they go, they have this innate value. And I think what has particularly irritated me and a lot of other guys, and I think the reason why you see a lot of these nasty comments, or vulgar comments, is because they detect this. Like in my life, my experience has either been, at best, I'll be perceived as neutral in a public space that I'm in, right? Or if for whatever reason they don't like how I look or something else, I will be perceived negatively, and I will get very clear, even from like customer service and shit, I'll get very clear vibes that they don't want me there. They want me out of there. Even if I'm a paying customer. I've had to deal with that fairly consistently in life. And I know that you can contextualize this by saying, well, isn't this the same as first worlders complaining about the circumstances that we're in? Whoopsie daisy. Comparing the circumstances that we're in versus third worlders who can't even survive. They're just starving to death. And there is some truth to that, but what I would say to that is we don't pretend that we are in the same category as third worlders. Okay? We don't pretend that our problems are the same as theirs. As a matter of fact, our main contention, like the main issue I have with mass immigration, obviously there's the diversity issue, like just losing demographic control of our country. But another factor is I know how much worse the third world is. And I know that these people, there's billions of people desperate to claw their way into our countries to take a chunk of our own assets, our own resources for themselves, which then spreads the resources more thinly. That's why I want to exclude them, because I know it's a zero-sum game and it's a net loss for me. My standard of living goes down because these people come in to improve their standard of living. All right, so it's not even an accurate reference or an accurate comparison. Because we're fully aware of the third world, how much worse it is for them, and we don't want that. Whereas these women are in complete, they have no conception of it at all. Upper third cell bangs cover-up game. Actually, you are right about that. Though I would still say she's quite cute. Hang on, I have this saved. Let me just find it here. I have this saved. A selfie of her face. Without any makeup on. Let me just find it here. Here it is. To be honest with you, I actually find her a lot cuter in this picture than I would in the picture where she's all done up. Because this actually feels more relatable to me. Like, one of the issues, and maybe this is cope, maybe this is just a way for me to sour grapes it, but I found that with very attractive women, because there's such a chasm between my experiences in life versus her experiences in life, even if we have like the same ethnic, racial background, the same socioeconomic background, our differences in experience are so vast. The gulf is so huge. We have no way of relating to each other in like in a non-sexual way. As in, like, okay, yeah, there's the element of like, if she's hot, I want to, insert my genitalia into her orifice. Okay, that's true. But when it comes to like the non-sexual areas where you develop a fondness for another person, and like a romantic connection with a woman that's not purely sexual, it has to be based on some kind of shared identification with each other. You have to see something in her that you can connect with and resonate with. Well, a very beautiful girl, her life experience is so alien to my own. There's no common ground there. There's nothing I could see in her life where I could empathize with that and feel like I really identify with this struggle. It's like, oh, I can only get this ugly guy to carry my bags, and Stacy over there can get a more attractive guy to carry her bags or whatever. Whereas in my case, I'm like, I can still remember there was this one time, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. It was right after COVID, where I was working at a place, and there was this overweight Nigerian woman who expressed pretty obvious sexual interest in me. And while I was not interested because she was not attractive at all, that's still stuck in my head to this day, because I was like, holy shit, a woman found me sexually desirable? What? And it blew my mind. And I still sort of held on to it until this day. And there's a lot of guys who will experience that. Like at one time, or maybe they'll think back to their past when they were a teenager and they didn't understand that there was that interest being expressed, but then they realize it after the fact and they think, oh fuck, like what, I fumbled this disastrously. No, there's a dog out there. If the dog barks a lot, I'll close the window. Anyways, there's a lot of guys who will retroactively think back to their childhood or teenage years where there's a girl expressing interest in them. And they'll think, oh my God, I fumbled this so bad. I wish I knew then what I know now. Women don't really experience that at all, because it's a consistent, as a matter of fact, the interest expressed to them skyrockets once they hit puberty for obvious reasons. So they've never had that experience of thinking back to a time when someone was expressing interest in them and they didn't realize it at the time. And then they feel this deep regret because they don't know if it'll ever happen again. This is the same for me. So just as a bottom line, like just the fact that she has no makeup or anything, she looks a lot more closer to average in this picture. I'd still say she's fairly pretty, but not, nothing super special. Maybe like a 5.5 or a 6. She's got clear skin. She has a symmetrical face. but maybe a big head. But that actually would really appeal to me, is the bottom line. Anyways, let me catch up on the live chat here. No offense, she doesn't look crazy. I've seen real crazy. Yeah, well, I mean, she was crazy enough to rope, right? So she did off herself. And remember, guys are willing to off themselves at far higher rates than girls are, and at much higher success rates than girls are, right? So the fact that she was able to do it without faking it, because most of the time it's just fake attention, right? In her case, she was able to successfully pull it off, which puts her in a relatively rare category of women, especially in the West. I think in places like China, I'm pretty sure the male to female suicide, male to female self deletion rate is almost at parity. It's like 1-to-1. And in a lot of third world countries, Muslim countries, for example, it's closer to like 2-to-1, where it's 2 men for every 1 woman. Whereas if you look at Western countries, and also the more developed Asian countries, it's like 4 to 5 men for every 1 woman self-deletes successfully. Right? Women will do more attempts. But one theory I've heard is that the religious stigmatization of self-deletion is that unchecked, it tends to be a social contagion. I could believe that too. Yeah, I could believe that. They're basically allowed to reject their gender and duties, both as women and mothers, is what chaos equivalent to order creates. You'll see more women going hermit. Well, I think a lot of women, as this is something we would even talk about back in the day, with women, there's a difference between frequency of snuggles and body count. Okay, so I think it is true that women, or at least not all women, because there's different differentiation within the population. But for women that are snuggly active, like the body count will go up, but the frequency will go down, which means that a woman might have a one-time encounter or a brief relationship of some kind with a guy, and maybe they'll get a new guy every couple months. And as a result, their number count stacks up really fast. But in terms of the actual snuggle experience they have, there's like long gaps of snugglelessness in between in between these situationships and these one-time events. So you actually see, as I said, you see the body count go up, but you see the body count go up, and you see the frequency go down. So, overweight Nigerian sounds like Paulo Gonzalez's girlfriend. You should have dated her, Mercer. You know, I sometimes wonder, maybe I should have considered that. Maybe I really missed out on this one. But because since then I've had nothing, right? So. Yeah, maybe it would have been worth it. But the thing is, I mean, I don't like even, there's something that just rubs me the wrong way. Maybe this is just my latent moral fagging, but I feel uncomfortable with starting a relationship with a woman that's purely for my own sexual gratification. You know, and I mean, by that I mean, not just that I'm attracted to her or whatever, or that like I just want to like pump and dump her or whatever, but also just the deception that goes along with that. Because typically what happens is that women that get into these situationships, the guys will be honest with them and say, look, I'm not interested in anything but screwing you and dumping you. And the women will go along with it thinking that they will get something out of it, or they can sort of change the circumstances with enough effort. And of course that doesn't happen, and then it creates drama and whatever. But there's just something distasteful about that to me, and it's really not what I want. You know, which maybe I'm not virile enough. Maybe my testosterone has gone down too much. I don't know, but it's just not what I really want out of life. But you know, I'm not going to criticize other guys that do this sort of thing, because there's plenty of women that engage in similar behavior, right? Obviously, it's not exactly the same. It'll be their version of it, which, for example, would be like foodie calls. Foodie calls are one of my favorites, right? And there are plenty of guys who will voluntarily sign up for a foodie call. Like, I remember I brought this up of this woman who would, she actually put it in her Tinder bio. She's like a 21-year-old white woman in California. And she put it in her Tinder bio that she wasn't looking to date anyone. She was just looking to get food paid for. And she made it very clear. And she said her super like rate actually went up. She had more super likes compared to before she put that in her bio. And she actually went out with some of these guys. And they were under the impression that this was like a pay-for-play tryout where they buy her food in exchange for getting the right to gesture for her and maybe be considered for a second date. Like that's, and they were willing to go for that. They were pleased to go for that. Right? So there are plenty of women that are like that too. So I'm not just saying that that the guys that do this, there's something morally wicked about them. We should actually stop. We should stop really defending women as a group. That's another thing I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next story. But let me read it a little bit more here. Dude, it's so bad out here. The average 304 and so-called femcels would rather pay a male escort for an hour or two than giving bucks to average or sub-5 male. I don't think they have to pay an escort. They can find, typically what they'll do is they'll get into these situationships with guys, or even just relationships, and the relationships will fail for whatever reason, and they'll just keep them on their socials. And if they want some kind of future hookup without something committal, instead of going to some random guy, they'll just hit up one of their exes, and they'll get in the sack with their exes for an SA. Because there's the familiarity there. They aren't just some random... Because you have to remember, women have to worry more about their personal safety than men do. Just as a matter of reality, right? Like women, there's more that they risk than men. Things could happen to them, whatever. So if they get with an ex, then it's not as much risk. So that's typically how they do it. I went to a mental health conference for self-deletion. A documentary on it was made by a lesbian. Something about that didn't sit right with me. There was no acknowledgement of men having higher rates. Yeah, well, you know what's funny is lesbians also apparently have significantly higher self-deletion rates. And there's a really famous example of this that's brought up all the time. There's this woman who wrote a book about how she was pretending to be a man for, I think it was like a month. Let me see if I can find... what was her name? Self-Made Man was the book. Let's see here. By Nora Vincent. Here we are. Nora Vincent. Okay. I actually read the book. And I gotta say, it's a pretty decent book, actually. Here it is. Self-Made Man. And she ended up getting... Oh, hang on. Celestial Armor. Thanks, man. Love these streams for your perspective. $8. So thank you very much, Celestial Armor. That's very generous of you. I appreciate it. And I'll try and keep them coming. Actually, I have to say, I almost pussied out on this one because my schedule is such that I had 2 days in a row last week, and then it was Friday and Saturday that I had to work, and these are 12-hour days, by the way. And then I have 4 days going forward after Sunday. So Sunday's the only day off I have, which made me think, oh God, I'm going to have to figure out a stream as well, in addition to doing this other stuff, because I have to do some chores as well. But I decided to do it. So, but anyways, the funny story about this Nora Vincent woman. First of all, most of the guys that will comment on this and say, oh, she had such a hard time being a man that she self-deleted over it, that's not actually what is said in the book. The book is a good book, but it's actually a lot more nuanced than you might think in terms of the like what she talks about. Like, she talks about it, she will talk critically about men and especially like working class male culture, especially how like sexually vulgar and driven it is. And to be honest with you, I tend to agree with her criticisms, because a lot of these guys, all they talk about is my dick. And these are rural white people, right? So they're not blacks either. But like, they'll be degenerate as well. And she does actually bring that up. And but she also criticizes women. Like, when I read that book, actually, the first thing I was going to do was I was going to send her an email just saying, wow, this made me really think a lot about men versus women. And then I had some questions for her. But then I found out she self-deleted. And apparently, though, this didn't have anything to do with the book. This was well after the book was written. And she had been in and out of institutions before the book was written. So she's always had mental issues. And yeah, she just ended up getting committed at some point to a mental institution, and then she ended up self-deleting after that point, which is very unfortunate. But it seems like lesbians actually do have an overall higher rate of self-deletion. So, you end your sentences with whatever a lot. That is true. One of the problems when you do public speaking in any kind of capacity, including streaming, people often have these like placeholding artifacts in their speech when they're trying to think of what the next word is, or they lose track of what they're saying. Instead of just interrupting their speech, they will say, like, that sort of thing. And if you want to get used to speaking publicly in any kind of capacity, you have to learn how to avoid that consciously. You have to consciously stop yourself. I still say like a lot, but that's my main pause word, is like. Or I'll use it to intersperse in between words if I'm trying to think of the next thing, because like is like it's like. It's a stopgap word that has no meaning. You don't have to think about anything related to it. You can stick it almost anywhere. Anyways. Also, if they get with an X, their body count doesn't go up. Many women think this way. Yeah, I mean, well, it's one of those funny things. It's like, okay, let's say that there's a girl who's had snuggles 20 times in her life, and she's had 5 different partners. And so they've been like very brief flings. Versus a woman who's only had 2 partners, but she's had snuggles 1,000 times, like 500 with each of them. So it was long-term committed relationships. Okay, well, technically, the frequency of snuggles is far, far lower. Like this, in terms of just purely the act, the first girl is actually much more closer to a virgin than the second girl is. But we assign a lot more moral virtue to the second girl. It's kind of a peculiar thing, if you think about it. A funnier example, pun intended, was a female comedian named Bonnie McFarlane that thought that being a Floyd was the reason people didn't laugh at her, and went on stage dressed as a man and got bombed. That name rings a bell. Was she the one that had the severed head of Donald Trump? That she had like a photo of, or am I thinking of someone else? Let's look her up. Bonnie McFarlane. No, I'm thinking of someone else. Yeah. Oh, she looks a little bit like Anita Sarkeesian. She's like a wider-faced version of Anita Sarkeesian. Kathy Griffin. Yeah, you're right. Is another Irish void. These Irish women, I don't know what we're going to do with them. Something about them. But no, female comedians are... I don't think I've ever seen a female comedian that is any good at all. Like, their jokes are bad. They do this weird sort of like quirky Chungus routine. It's identical. They're like trying to be... They deliberately try and put themselves into this like overly peppy, loud and extroverted tone. They don't seem to realize there are other tones you can take than that. This like extroverted Chungus tone, and it's really irritating. Like, if I was going to create a form of psychological torture that doesn't leave any marks, I would probably use female comedians that talk about like how they pussy stank and all the goofy exes that she has. I would make ISIS fighters listen to that for 20 hours straight or something, because I guarantee you that would break them a lot faster than whatever they're using now. Get a sip of water instead of pause words. See, I did that one stream, and then I got complaints that everybody was hearing me sip water way too much. So, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Anyways. Women have low libido. You know, I'm not so sure about that. I think that women, it's not so much that they have a low libido, though I do think it's lower than men's, somewhat. I don't think it's that much lower than men's. I think that their threshold for arousal is a lot higher than men's is. For men, it's almost difficult not getting aroused. You know, this is why, by the way, and I'm sure you guys know this, the reason why men get irritated with women that dress in a revealing way is because it does distract us and it involuntarily arouses us if they're attractive women. And this is irritating for a lot of guys because we don't want to be involuntarily aroused when we're walking around. And a lot of women have taken this annoyance with them dressing in a promiscuous way or in a revealing way. They take this because this is something we can't control. We can't prevent ourselves from being physically aroused by the bodies of women unless we desensitize ourselves to such an extent that we start getting erectile dysfunction or whatever, right? So it's not so much that we want to control them. It's that we want to prevent them from involuntarily influencing us. So it's less of an imposition on them. It's more like, can you not impose your sexuality on me? But women interpret it the same way that they would interpret Middle Eastern dress codes. In the Middle East, it's less about preventing men from getting aroused, though in some ways that does have an effect. And it's more about if a woman is... Because women are the property of men in a legal sense in a lot of these countries, or at least culturally, traditionally they are. If a woman is married, she needs to be covered up because her physical appearance, her body is the property of her husband. And it's almost like a property crime that the woman commits against her husband by revealing herself. It's a very different psychology behind it. But women will deliberately conflate these two things and not make any distinction. The I'm in my prime woman comedian comes to mind. I was just saying that. There's actually, I'll pull this up. Hold on. I put this in my meme folder. I got this recommended for some reason. 42, wearing clothes I never would have at 22. Yes, I'm sure that you are a giga-conservative, sensible young lady at 22. I'm sure that you were not running around half-naked at raves at 22. But it just struck me that we're going to be going through some real shit when these millennials, because I think the median age for millennials is like 37 or something. When that median age ticks over to the 40s, and the majority of millennial women are now undeniably old, right? Because you can still cope a little bit in your 30s, where you can be like, well, I'm not really young, but I'm not really old either. I'm just kind of in the middle. Okay, once you tick over to your 40s, there's no denying it. You're now closer to the grave than you are to the day you were born. Okay, that's really the symbol of old. And by your mid-30s, you're pretty much at the midpoint, right? Because I think the average mortality age is like 77 or something for most places. Like, that seems to be the natural human lifespan. So when you tick over to like 38 or 39, you have now ticked over to the half of your lifespan is already gone, right? Like, middle age is actually a misnomer, because people think of middle age as like mid 40s to through the 50s, and that's actually not true. That's like the second third of your age, right? You're already about 2/3 of the way through your life at that point. Middle age definitionally starts in your late 30s. And once these women tick over into middle age and they realize that they're no longer young, the coping, and I know this has been talked about by a lot of manospherians, but they talk about it politically. But I mean, in terms of, look, we've seen boomer women and Gen X women being very annoying about trying to pretend that they're not young or they're not old, even though they are old. Like, we've seen a lot of midlife crises and whatever. The collective midlife crisis that millennial women are going to have when they hit their 40s is going to be legendary. Now, it's going to have enormous political consequences. That's true. But it's also going to have extremely odd social consequences. I think you're going to see a very large rise in cougarism. Because you're starting to see a lot of these, and they're millennial women for the most part, of these school teachers getting caught in liaisons with their male students. Now, in terms of per capita, technically men are more likely to snuggle with their female students than female teachers are with their male students. But it's not that far off in terms of the difference between the two groups. And B, women are overwhelmingly more represented in the school system than men. So it's overwhelmingly these women that are getting involved with their younger male students. But what I think is important, though, it doesn't really matter like which is more represented. What matters is the frequency going up or going down. I actually think the frequency is going up, and I believe that this is because the sexual norms that governed society, even with the boomers and millennials, at least with regards to age barriers, they're starting to break down for women. Obviously, they're not really for men, but for women, you're starting to see those taboos break down much more rapidly. I think it's because women are getting more and more masculinized. I remember reading a statistic, and this is from quite a while ago. This was like 2018, 2019. So this is mostly measuring millennials. And as a matter of fact, I'm sure it's measuring millennials because Zoomers don't drink. But there was this study on millennials showing that millennial women, they swear a lot more than millennial men do. And they also binge drink a lot more than millennial men do. So I think as you're starting to see these, I guess you could say these gendered behavioral norms break down, and you start seeing a sort of universal masculinization of women, you're going to start seeing a lot of these age gap issues break down too, especially if these women are no longer, like if these women accept that they are not going to have a permanent relationship, you're going to see a lot of that where, I will say, actually, it's a funny thing. One of the pairings that I've noticed up here where I am now, because we have a black population, it's about 5-6% of the city. It's actually not that unusual to find a middle-aged white woman, like that's maybe in her 40s and 50s, overweight, and she's financing the lifestyle of a younger black guy who's like a lot better looking than she is, right? But it's obvious what's going on. It's like a reverse beta bucks situation. And I suspect that sort of thing, not necessarily in that specific racial context, I just noticed it because it was both interracial and also a reverse age gap, so that it stuck out in particular to me. But I've seen enough of it that it's not like a one-off thing. I'm not saying it's even that common, but it's not a one-off thing. And I think that's going to be, in general, you're going to start seeing more and more of these middle-aged women finance younger men in order to compensate for their youth disappearing on them. I can pass for 23 even though I'm 27 and I approach women mid-30s all the time. Wava permit mogging us all with his low inhib. Judge and a Mason Jesus. You can't tell suits to knock it off anymore. No, you can't. Taboos will break down as we import more and more immigrants that don't give a shit about Western taboos. Well, I think what you're going to see there, Jason, it depends on the country, but in Canada, the immigration crush has been so rapid and so extreme. And then on top of that, the state-mandated multiculturalism in Canada is such that the immigrant communities don't have to integrate to anything. They are actually given they're given incentives to preserve their own culture and create these ghettos, these ethnic ghettos. I think you're going to see multiple parallel societies, actually. So I think that whites, blacks, and Hispanics will form. There'll be like a white, black, and Hispanic and mixed multiracial population. You'll see that in one stream of society, and then in the another stream you'll see whites that are more upper class, and they'll also be with rice Asians and maybe a few other high achieving immigrant groups in a separate stream. And then you'll have immigrant communities, mostly Muslims and also Sikhs, like various Indian groups that are completely endogamous and really defensive. Because one of the ways that these places, one of the ways that Indians, Pakistanis, these other groups control their women is because they have these extended families that are very embedded and enmeshed. Being cut off by your extended family and ostracized is actually an extremely powerful way to prevent defection from your women to the outgroup. And because these communities, they have these extended families that still have a lot of influence, they're still able to do that. Now, that won't last because their birth rates are down, and they have monogamous marriages now, just as the norm. They don't have polygamy, and their birth rates are down. And as a result, you don't see large extended family networks like what would happen in traditional Muslim societies, let's say. So they're actually, as the number of cousins and other extended family members decreases over time, and you see more and more nuclear families without really any near relatives that are part of their family network, you'll see the women become more and more disinhibited and more willing to cross their family's boundaries. And I think you're actually seeing this with like second gen, third gen Indians up here in Canada. Because I will say, even though for the most part, because of the mate guarding that, again, ethnic men will do with their women, except for Asian men, obviously, it's actually pretty rare to see a white man with a brown woman who's not Latin American. Whereas you'll see a significant amount of the reverse, because they're fine with their men breeding out with white women or mixing with white women. Usually the rule is like white women will be accepted for dating, but you're not allowed to marry them. You have to marry eventually you just dump the woman and then marry a woman from your own background. So they kind of see white women as out for public use. But I did see one example of a white guy with an Indian woman, and they have a half Indian kid. It's like a J.D. Vance pilled marriage. And if you actually talk to these women, and I also actually, another thing I saw, when I was when I first arrived in the city I'm in now, I ordered an Airbnb because I didn't have anywhere to stay at the time, so I had to go rent a place, which I did. But at the time, I ordered an Airbnb for about 3 months. And the Airbnb was owned by this old white guy with a Japanese wife. And he had these weird religious beliefs. And he had these... The only description I could come up with for these two people is that they were like live-in servants, effectively. Like they were allowed to live rent-free in this big house that the guy owned, because he also lived in it, and he was renting out rooms in the house. He was allowed to live in that house, and the girl, they were a couple. They were allowed to live in that house insofar as any domestic duties that needed to be done, because this was a retired senior couple, any domestic duties that needed to be done, they would do them. And so it was like a service for lodgings situation. It was almost like a pseudo vassal system, or like they were kind of like serfs or whatever. But it was a white guy in his 30s and an Indian girl in her 30s, so, and they were also a couple. But that would be an example. And the Indian girl, you could tell like she was like a second, third generation immigrant. And you could tell that, and she was also South Indian as well. South Indians have a lot less, ironically, they're a lot more similar to Europeans in their social structure than Northern Indians are, even though Northern Indians have more European ancestry. Yeah, and I would say other than their race, because the thing is, dark skin, and I have to explain this as a European, or a Western European anyways, is of Western European extraction. Dark skin for us in a woman is not seen as a negative the same way it is in most of the rest of the world. So having like dark brown skin, if you have a physically pretty face and you have a nice body, having dark skin is not a problem typically for us. Like it doesn't really bother us. Not necessarily that we find it particularly appealing either, but it's just not a big issue. Whereas in most of the world, dark skin is, like for example in India, dark skin is actually, or skin color I should say, is more important for desirability than even any other single feature. Just having light skin in and of itself can boost you a lot in terms of your desirability. And it seems to also be the case in various parts of Asia. Like I remember I was talking to this Thai girl once, and she had told me that she had sent a video of her and her friend, and she was more of a brown skinned Thai, but she had a nice face, like good bone structure, pretty actually, quite pretty. And the girl that she was with looked like a frog, like literally like a fucking frog. She had like a big wide face, wide mouth, flat, tiny beady eyes, and also was fat as well. But she was very pale, and we had gotten talking about that, and she was like, yeah, my friend is perceived as more attractive than I am because she's lighter skinned. And that blew my mind. I was thinking, what the hell is wrong with this? Like, this is great because this is like a market failure, right? This is like if you find out that a given culture has a habit of throwing out gold because their culture doesn't value gold, and you're like, well, shit, I'm gonna take that gold. Because this chick had fantastic bone structure. Like if she made an Instagram, she could be an Instagram model. That's what I'm saying in terms of her features. But she's dark skinned, and that she could produce, like, even though that we know that Happas don't usually turn out that well, she could produce a good looking Happa because her bone structure was good. She had good facial bones. She had forward projection. She had a symmetrical face. She had a good body too. She had like a good figure, and it just blew my mind that she was considered undesirable. So, anyways, in this case, I would say that this guy and her were looks matched in terms of their phenotype, other than skin color. Because obviously he's white, he has white skin. She's dark skinned because she's a South Indian. She's not like super black, but she's like a brown skin that you would expect with a South Indian chick. Alex Prince. Let me actually read a little bit here. How can we avoid the pitfalls of becoming that creepy, childless 40-year-old guy on the one hand and becoming beta bucks oofy doofy on the other? Honestly, I don't see a solution to that. I mean, the only thing I could see us doing is if we can geomax and escape it. That's one thing. But even then, you wonder how successful that really would be. Because if we're just in our own countries, there's really no solution. You know, if I look at my options, which are like within 5 years of me, in terms of age, it's like 28 to 30, 28 to 33, 33 to 37, or 38. So it's like 28 to 38 if I want to do a very wide net within 5 years of my age. Or 28 to 33. 28 to 33. Or whatever. You know what I mean. Like late 20s and older, your options become a lot worse. And it's largely because it's not even that they necessarily, because there's all this talk about, oh, well, what if she's a single mom? That's actually, in my experience, if we're talking white women and we're talking other races of women, even black women, it's actually quite rare to find a single mom these days because women understand how much that harms their value as a mate. And so there is an extreme prejudice against having kids. Which is probably one of the reasons why the birth rate's down, is because of the fear of becoming a single mom. So as a matter of fact, you don't actually find that many single moms in their 30s. But the problem is the gulf of experience between myself and a woman my age is so huge, is so enormous that there's no... Again, it just goes back to the attractiveness versus like super beautiful women versus myself, for example. There's such a gulf in our lived experiences that there's nothing to connect on other than maybe if I find her attractive. But I mean, once you're in your 30s, obviously that's usually the peak, and then you start going down from there. You know, both in the case of both men and women, right? And then on top of that, oftentimes these women, they will not have, like, they'll have been there and done that, and there's really nothing there for you. Like, there's nothing special there anymore. You know, one of the saddest subreddits to go on Reddit, and I know Reddit is a garbage bin, but there are some interesting subreddits, and one of the saddest ones to go on is dating over 30, r/dating over 30. Because it's all the actual idealism, naivete, happiness, enthusiasm. It's all just drained out, and you get all that's left there is this sort of ugly, dirty calculation. It's like a number crunch. It's like, well, this guy I've been texting this guy, but he's taken this amount of time to reply to me. Should I text back? It's. And contrary to what a lot of red pillars will say, and also contrary, on the other hand, to what a lot of black pillars will say, I don't actually see much variation in terms of gender in despair posting on there, where you'll see guys and you'll see girls posting in that subreddit about how they're dreading that they'll never find somebody and that they'll be alone for the rest of their lives. Both men and women are posting that. It's very depressing. Which actually, this brings me to something else I wanted to briefly talk about. Which, maybe this is a bit of a... maybe I'm an outlier in this regard because of my opinion on this, but this here, from Empire Enjoyer, says here, Gen Z doesn't deserve their women. They belong to 6'5" millennials, special forces operators, and millionaire business owners. Now, obviously what's happening here, and there was another post as well that was really good about this, where a guy said, because it was this post here, a lot of these guys who were responding to this post, they were obviously thirsting over the young women. And there was this brilliant quote that I quote tweeted. Actually, I'll see if I can pull it up. Here we are. Der Erl Koenig. says here, if you peer under the lid of a pro-youth right-winger, all you'll find are a bunch of 30-plus-year-old men attempting to justify why it's eugenic for them to steal younger men's girlfriends. This is exactly what I've been talking about since the beginning of my channel, since I first started talking about this stuff 6 years ago now, or 5 years. 5 years ago now. This is the shit I was talking about. Is because there's these excess men piling up that are left over in their 30s now, like my generation, younger millennials, their instinct is to try and dip down into these younger demographics and steal women from the next generation. And this just compounds and makes the problem worse and worse and worse for each generation. And again, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have that you have to believe that a 40-year-old can date a 25-year-old just with red pill or whatever nonsense. That's not what I'm saying either. What I am saying is that they still are able to present themselves as competition. It's the same way that Indians, for example, Indian men flooding into a population and just simp maxing every woman on site because there's so many excess men in India that they just become the simp brigade. Even if no white woman is genuinely interested in dating them, which obviously is not true because there are going to be some women that are, but even if we assume that none of them would be interested in dating them, their egos get elevated. Their egos get inflated to such a degree by all this male attention that it just makes the market that much more competitive for us. Right? Did you really just say female attractiveness peaks in the early 30s? No, Panoni, I didn't say that. I said that female attractiveness already is on the decline by your early 30s. I would say obviously it peaks for women post-puberty. So like when most of them have completed puberty, it's 18. So like the median 18-year-old girl is probably going to be the most attractive that she can be. But it stays at a plateau for about 10 years. All right. So as long as the woman's physically taking care of her body, she's going to look the same or very similar at 28 to how she looked at 18. Because it's not like there's a linear decline upwards or linear rise upwards and then a linear decline downwards. There's a climb post-puberty and then it sits around the same level for about 10 years and then it starts declining. Or maybe it declines slightly, very slowly, but then the decline intensifies more rapidly post-30. Right? So that's what I was saying. You can't find any woman that has similar life experience, especially sexually, so they always have the temptation there to take advantage of you sexually. Well, yeah, I've called it the iDubbbz effect, right? This poor iDubbbz guy, he just gets clowned on by his wife 24/7 because his entire experience as a sexual being is encompassed by his wife. He has no reference point outside of his wife. That world, that part of him is entirely owned by his wife in a sense. Whereas his wife has had who knows how many ex-boyfriends. Her sexual experience with iDubbbz is just one among several others that maybe doesn't even have that much objective value to her. Like, it's quite possible that she's had better sexual relationships with previous men and that she just sort of, so she's able to rank it as like, okay, this isn't the number one, this is kind of mediocre, but this gives her far more power. This gives her it's an order of magnitude difference in power in the relationship. And you could tell just based on the behavior. And it's such a sad thing to see because, you know, I don't want to make the, I don't want to make the post that, men are the romantic gender or whatever. I'm not claiming that. Or like men are the romantic gender, women are not. I'm not trying to make such a binary claim because that's a difficult one to defend. That's what I'm trying to say. But, there are, because I would say that it's not a rule as a whole. I think the number of truly romantic people is a relatively small fraction of the population. And I think it gets extinguished very fast after a litany of sexual experiences. Because you lose that part of yourself as something that wholly belongs to someone else. But when you see it happen to someone like iDubbbz, it's so sad because you realize like this guy is basically built to be a one-woman man who probably in a previous era would have made an equally sexually naive woman just as happy. But because of the situation that he's in, he's just basically a slave to this woman's gash between her legs. We have the same Twitter feed, Mercer. I've seen all these posts. Yeah, you're probably right, Doomer. Well, I got fed. I was sort of already mad at women, just on a personal level, the day when this broke. And so I was interacting with all the tweets that were coming through. And so I just kept getting more and more of it. It's kind of a funny thing with Twitter is that you definitely get a ton of algorithmically driven rage posts. Yeah. What's your takes on moms who neglect the fact that their sons are inkies in their prime teen years, cannibalize their spiritual use for their own selfishness, then kick them out of the house once 18? I would say that sounds like a very typical white experience. Now, Mosquito, I think you are we share a Discord, though I don't think you're in my Discord. So I know your background is a little bit different from that, but there's very clearly strong parallels there, right? Though in a lot of cases I would have to say, like at least in terms of my mother, there's a lot of naivete there. Like I don't think my mother, I could never really classify my mother as being malevolent or like completely self-centered and uninterested in what's happening in my life. She's just completely clueless. You know, like she is a lot like the boomer that says, "Oh, just go inside and apply." You know, go walk up to the manager and hand your resume over firsthand, and they'll really respect that. You know, she's in that sort of mindset when it comes to dating. Though I have to say, to be fair to my mother, as I've said before in the past, my younger brother, I think it was like a stream or two ago, I talked about this. My younger brother recently got into a relationship with a Southeast Asian woman that he met at the pharmacy he worked at. Now, my younger brother is only 5'5", and he's uglier than I am. So he's probably maybe objectively like a 3.5 out of 10. Maybe if he looks maxed super hard, he could get a 4 out of 10, maybe. But he was able to get a Cambodian woman. And my mother has expressed a lot of joy out of this, even though obviously I'm white. Our parents are white. But I think my mother has concluded that for whatever reason, we don't really have good odds in the market. And the fact that my younger brother was able to get something and that this might lead to grandchildren at all, I think that's really, like, my mother at this point is given up. Because I remember, actually, here's a funny thing. I remember when I had this conversation with my mother once about Asian women, just out of curiosity. And she was, at the time, this was, I think, 10 years ago, she was quite, she disliked the idea of me getting with an Asian woman. Because she saw it as like, well, what, you're just saying that you can't handle a independent white woman. She unironically gave me that line at the time. And I thought, well, maybe. But it's funny that she's changed her tune since then. And I think she realizes that this isn't a matter of choice. Because I think at the time she was thinking, to me, it was like, oh, Mercer is, he just wants a woman that he has more control over. That he doesn't have to put as much effort into pleasing. That's why he's talking about Asian women, because they're easier for him to deal with. But you know, he could get a perfectly nice white girl, but he just doesn't want to deal with her having stronger expectations. But we've gone from that to now. She's just like, oh my God. Mercer's brother is talking to a girl. Oh my God, they're in a relationship. They've added each other on Instagram as boyfriend and girlfriend or some shit. And she's like over the moon about it. Like, holy shit. I might actually have grandchildren. I won't have to die without any grandchildren. God, it makes me feel kind of bad. But is your brother's Asian GF attractive? I think she's nice looking. I mean, she looks very much like she's not objectively ugly, but she looks very much jungle rice. Like she's quite brown, and her facial structure is very much jungle rice, but it's not jungle rice in an ugly way. Like I would say it's the kind of jungle rice you'd see a boomer with, like from the Philippines that he imported, that's like 25 years younger than him. Just kind of like median jungle rice. I would consider her attractive enough that I would be okay with, well, the main problem I would actually have is that because she looks so ethnic, any kids that they have are going to be like, they'd be very lucky to hit Elliot Rodgers level, right? They'd be very lucky. Like those kids are going to look basically like Mexicans. and not the northern Mexicans either, the southern Mexicans. The whole world is topsy-turvy. I get called a creep at work for being quiet while the black guy gets away with making fruit jokes. Yeah, you are onto something there. There are different standards. I actually remember there was this brown Foyd that was getting on my case. And this is like a fat bitch, too. She was getting on my case about something at work. Like, oh, why are you sweeping this corner? You need to be over, because it's busy right now. You need to be over here watching the customers pass through. And I was like, okay. I was doing that, but I was keeping an eye on both of them. I was keeping an eye on them to make sure they stopped, and then also sweeping at the same time. And then when I look back later, she's just standing around talking with other people. Like, she's not doing anything herself. And then you realize, well, we're held to different standards. And there was another chick that was working there who's also brown, by the way. And she is apparently on antipsychotics, and she has to take an extended break every hour or so because she has like a mental episode. And I remember thinking, if I did this shit, I would be fired within a day. But of course, we're held to different standards. And to be honest with you, even though it annoys me, I've internalized this is just the existence that we have to live under, you know? And I imagine that this is how blacks under Jim Crow had to deal with, like, had to internalize their... Because blacks under Jim Crow, they did experience the same kind of double standard, right? Of course, like by design. It was double standard by design. Now, it's a lot more implicit in our case. It's not like an explicit, whites are not allowed to do this, but people of color are. It's not quite that obvious, but it's very much implied in how the management reacts and what they will tolerate versus what they'll tolerate from us. And I imagine that the same sort of resignation to an unfair system, where it doesn't even really bother me anymore, I just expect it. I imagine that that's the same feeling that a lot of blacks had during Jim Crow. The ones that didn't, because we always wonder, like, there's actually one of the, if you look at any interviews from A.H., the Mustache Man, and when he was talking about blacks in America, he found blacks in America really, he disliked them. He didn't find them respectable. And the reason why is because they did not riot to change their conditions. And it's like, well, when you live under this system and it's stable and it's very clearly not going away, and everyone else around you who is of your background just accepts it and enforces it themselves, because my management is all white and they enforce it themselves, you just accept it as the way things are, like the will to resist it, even though you could say it's unjust. If the rest of the world functions the way it is without anyone, like there's no global narrative to right this wrong. You just sort of accept it as is. And I can actually understand why they think that way, because I'm feeling that way in a lot of cases. Is your brother's, is she skinny at least? Yeah, she is skinny. She is skinny, so she's thin. And she's fairly young too. I mean, he's young as well. He's in his early 20s, and so is she. So, I wasn't certain that they were dating, but apparently it's been quite a few months now, and they're actually planning on moving in, so it's unambiguous at this point. So, you truly realize it's over once your parents give up on you and stop asking when you're going to get a girlfriend. Yep, 100%. My mother once, for a while, it's pretty funny. At first, my mother was, she would sort of probe me about this sort of thing. When are you going to find a girlfriend, or did you meet any nice girls, or whatever. Like she wouldn't do it in a. Like, my mother has a lot of social tact. She understands how to phrase things in a way that it doesn't sound like I'm being put upon. And she graduated from, she would probe me about girls that I was interacting with, and maybe make a few jokes about, when am I going to have grandchildren, in a joking way. And then she graduated from that to, she was sort of probing me at one point to see if I was gay or not. She'd be like, if it turned out that you were gay, I would fully accept you, typical white mother sort of thing. I would fully accept you. I would be fully happy with you. You would just need to let me know, and I would have no problem with it. And that's when I realized, okay, she's thinking that the reason why I haven't had a woman around is because she thinks I'm gay. And then it graduated from that to just never asking about it, which, bless her heart, she recognized the situation. I feel more bad for her than for me, because, a lot of these people, it's kind of like dodos. If you think about the history of the dodo just sort of sat around and didn't need to do anything to protect itself from predators. So it just got bigger and bigger and slower and clumsier. And then all of a sudden, and of course it was working perfectly fine, and it only had 1 or 2 eggs per breeding session. And they were able to continue their life on the Galapagos Islands without any problems. Or was it Mauritius? I think it was one of those islands. It was an island I think the French eventually claimed. Anyways, then all of a sudden the Portuguese show up, and they have dogs, and they have cats, and they have other domestic animals. And of course they themselves see these birds as a big fat opportunity to eat. And within a generation, they're gone. They're fucking dead. They're extinct. And in a lot of cases, these, both economically and also socially, these boomers and Gen Xers, they existed in an environment similar to the dodos pre-contact, where they didn't need to have this intense competitive mindset. They didn't need all this pressure. They didn't need all this pre-planning of their own children's lives so that they could be successful. They didn't need to do genetic counseling to ensure that their boys would have a sufficient genetic quality to attract a woman and keep her around. They didn't need to do that, and they just assumed things would continue the way that they did for them. Because why wouldn't they? Right? Why wouldn't you assume that? And as a result, they raised a generation of dodos, which were millennials, and also Zoomers coming up, and we're getting whiplashed by these immigrants that have come in to compete with us economically, and we're also getting whiplashed in terms of dating and romance, because the standards have risen so much more dramatically now compared to previous generations, because the number of men competing for available women has shot up enormously. The ratio is way worse now than it was even 10, 15 years ago. There was this Zoomer poster who was talking, and he was complaining about millennials, and I thought there were some elements that were not fair. He was saying, here, let me actually pull it up, because I commented on this, actually. Let's see here. Let's see. Pull it up here. Here it is. Oh, the post was deleted by the author. Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, I'll pull myself up. Just a second here. I'll bootstraps myself. Here's my account. So, okay, this is information ecosystem, but then there's another one I did. Here we are. So he was talking about how millennials had it better economically, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Here. And I talked about how I graduated high school in 2011, and he was saying that all you had to do was buy a house by 2017 and you were winning the game. And I said, look, I graduated 2011. If I'd gone straight to college for a STEM major as soon as I graduated high school, I would have been out by 2015, which would give me 2 years to buy a house, which wouldn't have happened in Canada anyways, because the economy in Canada, the wheels started falling off by 2013. So, or 2014, 2013. That was when the Canadian dollar started collapsing. That was when the US started to frack, and that drove the price of oil down to like $60 a barrel. That made it much, much worse for us economically. And look, the point isn't to try and say, oh, we have it so much worse than Zoomers, because we don't. And one of the things, and it's a shame I can't bring this up, because he deleted the post, clearly. One of the things that he brought up that I agreed with strongly was he said the biggest advantage millennials had over Zoomers is that we had a normal childhood. And that is 100% correct. This is one area where they're absolutely correct. I didn't experience social media, online gaming, all these things until I was in high school. Whereas with Zoomers, like my younger brother, for example, he grew up playing video games with school kids, like his friends at school. Instead of hanging out with them, he would go online on Steam and he would get into group chats with them and play Fortnite or play Minecraft or other games like that, Rocket League. He would play games like that as opposed to going outside. And one of the things that you lose from that is that women are not interested in playing Fortnite. Women don't give a shit about Rocket League, or some like Minecraft, but most don't. So you end up with men and women, or boys and girls, I should say, at a very young age getting siloed into completely separate friend groups. Whereas with millennials, like even in my case, I remember I grew up with more girls than boys around, just because there was more girls on my block. So I made a no girls allowed fortress, but I had to include this long list of exceptions on the side because like 9 out of the 10 kids on my, it was like 7 out of 10 of the kids on my block were girls and the others were boys. Like 3 out of 10 were boys. So we had to include some girls, right? And that sort of thing continued well up into the teenage years. I only remember the boys starting to retreat to online gaming with Xbox Live, so like Halo 2, and also World of Warcraft was a huge one. World of Warcraft really separated boys off, like nerdy boys. Now you can make the argument, well, these boys probably wouldn't get anything anyways, but as I was saying in my last stream, it's like the BP can tell you how to optimize your chances and like what is a good investment of your time and energy versus what's not a good investment. So trying to get into the social circle of 8 out of 10 girls, if you're like a 4 out of 10 guy, it's probably a waste of your energy. You're not going to get any results from that. There's no point in doing that. Okay. Whereas if you're in like a sort of weird, there's a group of kids that are kind of like the weird kids, and there's girls and boys in there, and there's girls that are at your looks level or close to it, then there's like potentially the energy that you invest in that could pay off. Okay. And the opportunities that would let you roll the dice and see what happens, they did exist for millennials. And I have to say, like in the job that I'm working right now, I'm interacting with a lot of millennials that are my age or older, like 30s, 40s. And whenever I've seen a looks matched couple or a looks matched couple that's under 7 out of 10, so like normie looks match, or even couples where the guy is uglier or fatter or whatever than the girl, most of those relationships are with millennials, and they probably met in high school. Like I was talking about the girl at the beginning of the stream who self-deleted, and her boyfriend was nothing special to look at all. And you could come up with just be tall, just be this, just be that as an explanation, when I think the reality is simply that he probably met her when they were in high school together or something along those lines, and that's how they established a relationship, because high school is this rare circumstance where the gender ratio is usually about even, and also because of age of consent laws, you are gatekept, or older guys are gatekept from competing with you for these girls. You know, now obviously there are girls that will go after guys outside of school or whatever, but that still increases your chances. And I think most of the time when you see these, like, as we call them, oofy doofy relationships, it's going to be they either met in high school or they met in college. Now, I would probably say more high school than college, because college, there's very little pairing off that happens. And I'm not even saying that this is common either, because it's not. But the times that it does happen, that's what it is. Some of us millennials were also lucky this way. Even I had female friends preteen, and it all came crashing down when puberty hit. It was over. Yeah, I remember it. Yo, I remember, and this is so fucking crazy to me. I remember when I was, because my parents are divorced, I was living with my mother at the time, because I would visit my mother for the summertime. Thankfully, my parents were amicably divorced, so there wasn't any custody battles or whatever. So on that particular year, I was going to school in my dad's city, which was Ottawa. But when the school was out, I would spend the summer at my mother's place. So I was at my mother's place because it was the summer, and she was in a different town. And I had made friends with the kids that were living around her house in the neighborhood, because it was a little neighborhood. And there was like 5 or 6 kids, and they were a mix of boys and girls. And they were also all around the same age as me, teenagers, early teens, like 13, 14. Same with me. And I remember I was playing a game at that time called Phantasy Star Online. And actually, let me pull this up. This game was actually, by the time I was playing it, it was already in, it was in like maintenance mode. Oh, hang on. Phantasy Star Online. No, I don't want Online 2. Just want Phantasy Star Online. All I see is PSO 2. No. Looking for PSO 1. Oh, here it is. This fucking game. Actually, I really loved it. This was such a fun game at the time. But I remember I was so engrossed in this game that these kids came, and it was a girl. That I remember this distinctly now. I don't know why it carved into my memory. There was a girl who, and it was her sister, and a guy who was also living in the street. And she knocked on my door, and my mother opened the door, and she was calling up like Mercer is up in his room. I'll see if he wants to come out. And I remember actually coming up with an excuse to not go out because I was so engrossed in this game, Phantasy Star Online. Just playing it online. I was having so much fun with it. And I'm not sure if this is 1 or 2. I played 1, so it was like a old school, and it wasn't even active anymore. The game hadn't been maintained for over a year at that point. It was in permanent Christmas mode. It was fun though, and as a result, they stopped coming around because it was like, well, Mercer's no longer interested in hanging out with us. I guess let's just find someone else who does want to hang out with us. And Oh, yeah. Hey, Anton. Yeah, I'm live. I'm live pretty much consistently at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. Well, Velvet Rope, I tried to make a move on one of these girls, and she just sort of pushed me off, but not in like a shutdown way, but in kind of like a deniable way. I remember, and also I remember I had a one of those sweater jackets. You know those ones that are like sweaters that you can zip up in the front, and they have a hood on them. I remember I had a really nice one, and I let this girl use my sweater jacket because it was cold out, and she just loved it so much that she asked if she could keep it, and I just let her keep it. And this was an expensive one too. Like I had gotten it for Christmas, I think, and it was one of the pricier ones. So I was even simping back then. Right? It obviously you can tell based on me doing the stream now how much that got me, but yeah. Point is that I can actually pinpoint when I lost my friend group connections as a teenager. You know, and then you realize Zoomers never had that experience at all. Like we occupy completely different social environments growing up. I think somebody said millennials are the last analog generation, in the sense that even though we had the internet and we had permanent online access, we didn't have it until we were already almost adults. Whereas with Zoomers, you guys grew up with it, or the Zoomers that are listening, you grew up with it pretty much from childhood onwards. And it's defined your entire understanding of the world, you know? You got to get into a fried group that has a nerdy girl who's your looks matched. Yeah, Dr. Winkles, that's how it used to be. Nowadays, the nerdy girls, if you're a nerdy girl and you're thin and you're by any stretch even remotely attractive, you will have an army. Like you'll enter a Discord and you'll immediately be promoted to moderator, you know, and you'll have like an army of simps worshiping every post you make. Actually, oh hey Gresh. Oh, I didn't see that Gresh was here. Oh, it's great to see that you were able to find one of my streams. Yeah, I've been Gresh, the one Gresh in here. He's the guy who, if you listen to the first 15 minutes of my stream where it plays that song on the loop, that's the song that he created on his channel, which is, I believe it's youtube.com/ is the one Gresh. That's what it is right there. If you go to that, that's Gresh's channel, and it's been great. I also stole, because I was running out of ideas for thumbnails, I had to steal one of your thumbnails for 2 streams. If that annoys you, I can swap those thumbnails out. But yeah, that's the Gresh. He's good shit, and he's an old cell too. He's been around since way back in the day. Mamoon days. Hobo maxed and granny maxed my way to $500. Sieg Nelson, you gotta explain yourself. Listen, if a granny wants to beta bucks me, I will totally be her dick slave, I guess. Somehow I don't think I would be able to find that arrangement. I remember there was only text-based local forecast on the Weather Channel being broadcast. You mean like without a weather person doing the? I don't remember that, but yeah. I've noticed unattractive girls farm gaming communities for simps, like Pokimane, for example. Yeah, exactly. Mid Sandfoid, but famous due to being a gamer. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And actually, you know what's funny? I remember there is and it's on one of my old phones because I screenshotted this entire story. It was from a Reddit. Obviously, it could be full of shit. Could be nonsense, but there was this post on Reddit about this, and this was right. It's like 2022 or so. So this was still when trannyism was still really big, and this was a guy posting about how he was like this lonely, awkward kid who nobody really cared about or liked or talked to, and then he created this female persona on an online game and acted as a girl, pretended to be a girl. And because everybody was including him in everything, and they were always interested in what he had to say, they were always going out of their way to do things for him. He felt such a strong attachment to being welcomed and accepted and praised by these group of guys who thought he was a girl, that he started to develop gender dysphoria. And it wasn't gender dysphoria due to, like, the typical, oh, I really feel like I want to be a woman. I really need boobs and I need to cut my dick off. It wasn't that sort of thing. It was because he felt like this female persona that he had created online was so much more, it was such a better existence to be in than the existence he actually lived as a man, where nobody gave a shit if he lived or died, that it became like a source of extreme dysphoria for him because he just hated being a man. And I remember he made this really long post about it, and he was just and he concluded with, I think he was like getting into transitioning or something. And normally I'm quite, I'm one of the types that is quite critical of these transgender people, right? I don't think they should exist, legally speaking. But in this particular case, I actually felt quite a lot of empathy for this guy, because it wasn't like one of these freaks that thinks that, he's a girl, and I think it's called autogynophilia, where they're sexually attracted to the idea of themselves being a woman, and those types, right? Those are just perverts. But in this case, I actually genuinely felt a lot of empathy for him, because it almost kind of punched me in the gut, because I've never experienced that. I've never LARPed as a woman, but just the feeling of not mattering to anyone and just being an observer in life. And then you step out of that frame and into a separate frame, like a separate life. It's almost like an isekai experience. If you guys know isekai, which I know most of you do, the whole fantasy narrative behind isekai is that you step out of yourself, out of your old life, just due to some, let's say you get hit by a car or something. You're some loser working a loser job. Nobody gives a shit if you live or die, and you're like a virgin incel, and you get hit by a car, and then suddenly you're reincarnated into this world where you actually you matter, you have purpose, you're an active participant in the world instead of just observing everyone else living their lives. And it really struck me and it's one of the few Reddit posts where you could tell it was genuine, because there's no real cynical motivation. It didn't get that much attention either on the place it was posted, because it wasn't a typical transgender post, right? But I consider it there's one other post on Reddit where it was from a disabled men's community, where it was a guy just talking about how it dawned on him eventually that he would never be perceived as sexually desirable by anyone. Like, he was basically confined to be alone for his entire life, and something inside of him snapped, and he just started to become extremely sexually vulgar and degenerate towards women whenever he had the opportunity. And it was almost like an act of despair on his part, where it was like, okay, I can't, like, these women will never acknowledge my existence, but I can at least disgust them and make them uncomfortable. And because of my condition as a disabled man, they're going to feel limited in how they can retaliate against me. And it's like, it's this sad, pathetic way of striking back against this world that has made their lives completely meaningless and pointless. You know, like, what's the point of existing at that point? You know? If you're a weather buff, I'm saying I grew up in a time when they used the Weather Star 3000 on Time Warner and graduated to the Weather Star 4000, but this is geek autism stuff. Oh, yeah, Lone Hiker, that's mogging me. That's knowledge mogging me completely. I had no idea. You're only going to find dudes that are into this stuff like this, right? You're never going to find women that are into that degree of minutia, of exact details. And it's also why I find it so funny when you see female separatists we're like, we're going to create a parallel all-woman society. It's like, listen, you're never going to find a woman who's going to know the difference between Weather Star 3000 and Weather Star 4000. You'll never find a single woman that understands that. And as a result, they won't be able to predict weather, and then a tornado is going to come down and kill them all, right? So... Oh, you sent a super chat, the real question. Hang on, sorry, 1 second. Let me pull this up. Oh, I see. Can you see me now? Have you heard of the Lego scandal? That shows exactly what I'm talking about when I speak of coalitions and the powers of groups. No, I haven't. Can you give me some keywords to look up? Can you see me now for the Lego scandal? Yeah, if any of you guys do send me a super chat and I fail to read it, just send a message in the live chat. I'll see it and I'll get to it, because sometimes I don't see the pop-up. But I have not heard of the Lego scandal. Let me see. I'll look it up. Lego scandal. Let's see here. Brick fanatics. What? Let's take a look at this. By the way, can you see me now? Did you... Because you were in my server, and it looks like you got... It says that you left the server. Did your account get screwed over? Or something? Because just join back in and send me a message. I'll pop you right back in. We've been having some issues with people getting banned and having their accounts limited on Discord. So if that did happen to you, it's not just you. All right, let's do a quick read over of this. All right. Independent retailer Bricks and Minifigs is at the center of a legal dispute after allegedly failing to honor a consignment agreement for a $200,000 Lego collection. Dispute began in 2023 and is 80%. Collection reported more than 780 sets and 1,200 minifigures, with the pair valuing at around $200,000. And sealed copy of Lego Star Wars Cloud City. Oh God, this is like... I'd be curious to... the Lego collectible community, I would be curious to get a gender ratio analysis on that. Somehow I think it's going to be... very similar in gender ratio to the male-female breakdown of who watches my videos and who watches my streams. I'm pretty sure that's like 99.9999% male and then 0.0000001% unknown. So consignment agreement is arrangement with one party and trusts them to sell on their behalf in exchange for a share of the proceeds. Okay, so they're acting as like a pawnbroker, basically. I don't know. Gorman under 30 agreement should include terminate. Let me just see if I can cut to the chase. Unpaid obligations. Oh, is this like Mormons acting like a racket or something, or acting like a mafia? Mansell cited 2 breaches of the agreement: failure to make a November payment, according to Mansell. Oh. Interesting. All right. Well, anyways, yeah. I don't really want to consume too much of the stream going through that, though it is interesting. I will take a look at it a little more. after the stream. But actually, talking about groups, this is an interesting story I wanted to talk about as well. And it's a little more edgier. But Dr. Winkle's Lego Scandals, bunch of Mormons. Yeah, Mormons, gotta be careful with Mormons. Anyways, yeah, Mormons actually, just to recap, Mormons are interesting because they're very heavily favored, I believe, in the CIA. And one of the reasons they're favored in the CIA is because their religious conservatism leads them to have relatively moral lives, which makes blackmailing them quite difficult compared to just a random normie. Okay, but in addition to that, they don't have any loyalties to the broader conservative American population, including whites, because as Mormons, they're like a separate subgroup that is religiously hostile to these other groups, in terms of their religious tradition. So as a result, the Mormons can be relied on to not betray the state in favor of the rest of the moral majority in America, like the conservative white Christian America. So it's interesting. You tend to see with secret services, if you have a government that views its own majority population as suspect, they're going to operate using middlemen, which are Semitic friends, the Jews. They operated as that in many cases. They were very heavily overrepresented in the NKVD, which is the Soviet secret police, for a long time because of that, because they could be trusted by the Soviet apparatus, because they would torture Russians, they would torture Poles. Russians generally wouldn't torture Russians. Now, this story is really funny. Okay. So, illegal migrant charged with killing 4 people in wrong-way DUI crash on Oklahoma highway. First of all, the memes are really funny about this one. There's somebody saying, Mexicans doing the jobs white men won't do. Okay, it's funny. But what is important about this is that the hostility towards these women for their choice of significant others is... Twitter is fucked when you see a story of a Mexican, I don't know if that's a Mexican, he looks like more mixed with black, who killed 4 people in a DUI accident. All the comments are just white Nazis for praising him for killing snow bunnies. Y'all are fucking dark, damn. Yeah. Now we are seeing this very overt hostility towards these women. In the past, what you would see with these sort of stories is you'd see an undercurrent of that, where you see like toll paid, or she voted for it, or whatever, stuff like that. You would see that as an undercurrent, but the majority of people, or at least like the plurality, would be like, oh, this is horrible that our women are being killed by these migrants. This is, we need to expel them all, whatever. Oh, hey, Tails, how you doing? Lowest IQ statement of all time. Well, maybe. Hey, listen, keep listening. I'm sure I'll come up with a lower IQ statement. Anyways, what's interesting about this is that they're way more overt about it now. And what I think you're seeing is, because I'm thinking about how whites cannot prevent defection of their women. Like, there's no way that you could coerce these 2 white women into not choosing non-white men in opposition to their own men. There's no way for them to prevent that from happening. So what solution do you have as a white man if you can't do that? Now, the way that, for example, Pakistanis and other Muslims deal with these issues is they coerce their women. So if a Pakistani woman is caught with a white man, let's say, what's going to happen to her? She's probably going to have acid thrown in her face. At an absolute minimum, she's going to be ostracized from her entire community and driven out. And that's at a minimum if she's lucky. It escalates from there to acid in the face, to physically attacked, to attempted murder, honor killing. And as a result, there's this environment of fear and dread and fear of retaliation that keeps these women from being disloyal. Dr. Winkles, if you have to police someone's behavior, you already lost. I disagree. I think that most of human history has been policing behavior in one way or another. Like the reason why women behaved in a more moral way in the past is not because they were better people. Like girls today are not better morally than they were 100 years ago. The enforcement of boundaries was different. Because there was extended families, you could use those extended family networks to pressure girls into following a set of social norms with ostracism from the extended family and community, and also social ostracism in general from the rest of the community for failing to adhere to those norms. Okay? This caused women, for example, white women in European countries, this is what caused them to be more moral in the past than how they are now. Not because they are just better people and that they're evil now and they weren't back then. No, it's just because the enforcement has become far, far weaker. Okay, so, and this problem is not just a problem for white men, it's also a problem for Asian men and black men. Black men can't prevent black women from defecting. Asian men can't prevent Asian women from defecting. How do you deal with this? Well, the way that you could, like one possibility would be, and this is what the white Sharia posters think, is, we're going to create a regime of fierce repression of women, and we're going to re-enslave them, and we're going to brutally repress them if they attempt to defect from us. Now, I think for psychological reasons, it's impossible for whites to create that kind of regime. It's just not in our psychological infrastructure. Even if you tried to take away women's right to vote, you probably get the majority of men opposing you, not just women, men. It's actually funny. If you look at the history of German elections and democracy, when women first got the right to vote in Germany, they voted in the majority for the political party that opposed enfranchising them, the Conservative Party. I think it was like the Christian Conservative Party, whatever it was at the time. They voted in the majority for that party. What that actually means is that there were more men that were interested in giving women the right to vote than women that were interested in voting. That's the funny part, right? So there's something in European psychology that you'll never get around women having a high degree of personal freedom. You'll never be able to impose Islamic-style segregation, or even just like Oriental style, because Asia was also like this too. In China and Korea and Japan, women were not allowed to leave their houses. Like they were physically confined to their houses after marriage. India, it was a similar phenomenon. In India, if girls would be married at like age 10 or 11 or something, and they would be married to men that were 40 years older than them, and then once their husbands died, maybe they would be like 20 or 25 or something. If they were lucky, they would be treated like the living dead, and they were never allowed to remarry. If they were unlucky, they would end up getting burned alive on their husband's funeral pyre in something called sati. But those are the non-European ways of living. Europeans, I don't think that we have it in us to do that. So I think that we can just discard that as a possibility right off the bat. Another way that this could be accomplished would be through this is it seems kind of ironic or odd and accelerationist, but the security of white women eroding, like it becoming more and more permissible to attack white women for ethnic men, and white women being excused from, or attacks on white women being excused or being decriminalized effectively. That is actually what will benefit white men the most in terms of enforcing boundaries. Because once white women's security is no longer guaranteed by the state, just because of racial reasons, because they're viewed as a racial enemy group, then you will start seeing the value of being in the presence and protection of a white man. The value of that will go up and it will increase. And then the need that these women feel to conform to the desires of their men will increase. That's the only thing I could think of that might work. I don't know if there's anything else that could work. And you know what made me think about this was way back in, I think, 2013 or so. I was talking to this Libyan guy on Skype and Facebook. And you know he's a real Libyan because he had a picture of himself dressed up as Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece. So you know he's a real Libyan. Fucking Arabs love fucking One Piece. They love it. Anyways, I remember I was talking to him because he was in a village against, or in Misrata, I believe. And I think he was on the pro-government side when the Libyan civil war was happening. And of course, Gaddafi ended up dying. He ended up getting killed. But what he told me was that the central government collapsed and all the cities and towns and villages were self-governing. They were basically being run by militias. And he said that Sharia is like the default backbone of every Muslim society. So when there's a vacuum in central authority for a secular government, it's going to get filled by almost like spontaneous grassroots Sharia being imposed, because that's just sort of the default mechanism. And what he told me is that we have a dress code for our women. They have to wear the hijab, they have to wear the chador, they have to operate in a certain way towards men. And if they choose not to do that, they won't be punished for choosing not to do that. But the rules of protection that are granted to them, where if a woman is being physically accosted by a man, the men of the society are obligated to intervene and protect her. That was the way that it worked. However, if she is found to be violating the social norms that they impose, again, she's not going to go to jail for that. They don't really have the resources to do that. But if anything were to happen to her, no one's obligated to protect her. No one's obligated to save her. And he told me this is how we maintain our social norms in the absence of the central government. And that stuck with me. Because it is actually, like, that is how men are able to enforce their authority without needing to be overtly coercive, right? The state of nature is really what women depend on men to protect them from, right? And if you just withdraw that protection and there's no one else to protect them from the state of nature, that's sufficient oftentimes. They will behave just out of necessity. Or at least that's the best hope, because there is no other alternative for whites. The only alternative I can think of is what I talked about in that other stream where I was talking about the Indian chick who was promoting this sort of vague pro-Western patriarchy traditionalism. And what she is really doing there is she basically is a racial nationalist for white men exclusively. So, like, if you were to open up her brain and analyze her brain without her being able to lie, or if you were able to give her a truth serum and you were to interrogate her, I am 100% certain, I think her name was Megha Verma. If you were to interrogate her, I guarantee you, she would say she only wants to live in a society that is where the male population is exclusively white men. I guarantee you she would say that. But of course, she's not going to make the corollary for women because she herself is not white. But they can't come out and say that because it doesn't really make sense from a ethno-nationalist point of view. So they come up with this sort of vague civilizational argument, like we're defending Western civilization. And she says something really revealing, like, I would rather be around people that really know about my civilization and identify with it than just people that share the same race. And obviously what she's saying is, like, these white women, they are your enemies, basically. Like, they're rejecting your civilization, but we support you. And so we should be included and we should replace them. Like, that's their logic, right? I think that is the only alternative other than what I described before, where white women lose more and more legal protections because here's the thing. Ethnic women really hate white women. Like black women especially, but ethnic women in general do not like white women at all. And and because ethnic women are above white women and ethnic men on the oppression hierarchy, like women of color are one of the top, I think, other than lesbian and LGBTQ, 2AL, WLW, whatever. Other than those women of color, just heterosexual women of color are at the top of the woke hierarchy. And so as time goes on and as white men become weaker and weaker as a target, and that it becomes more and more difficult to unify the woke coalition against white men, you're going to start seeing them turn more and more on white women, because they already naturally dislike white women, because every race of men pedestalizes white women over their own women and wants white women over their own women. That creates a lot of resentment from women of color. And as a result, as I said, like as soon as white men become too much of a punching bag, that we're no longer perceived as the same threat as we used to be, because we're just driven out of society pretty much altogether, you're going to start seeing white women get turned on more and more and more. And then the question is, well, if you're a white man and you really want to save the white race, if you're really dedicated to that, you have to support disempowering white women within the enemy coalition as much as possible. Like whenever you see like that Rana, whatever his name is, versus the Lajdini chick, the Albanian chick, where he's like, your fish head wife doesn't have these cannons, that guy. We have to hope that he wins. We have to hope that he wins his case against the Lajdini chick, because that would set a new precedent where white women can be Me Too'd without any real evidence, on like obvious flimsy evidence. Now, I don't think he's going to win, but if he did win, it would be glorious. Like that would be a severe blow to white women in the woke hierarchy. Because this is different, because right now, like the reason why white women, I think, to a large extent, are eager to throw white men under the bus and are also perfectly happy to race mix with men of various other backgrounds that are also part of the coalition, is that they feel like they're still going to be in a dominant position in that hierarchy after white men are gone. Like they get the general impression that they're going to be the queen bees because they're the most desirable race of women, right? Like every ethnic man wants a white woman. It's just a fact. And white women imagine that they will basically be on top of the hierarchy once the white man is gone. In order to reverse that trend, because this is what's allowing white women to be, or this is what's causing them to be so hostile to white men, you need to force them out of that hierarchy. Now, there's very little that white men can do in general. I would just say, like, this is a similar opinion that I had when it came to the transgender issue. When the transgender issue was still really hot and it was rad femmes, TERFs versus trannies, I was saying back then, I think it was a year and a half ago or so, we should not be getting entangled in this conflict. It doesn't benefit us to bail women out of this LGBTQ versus mostly white women conflict on the woke hierarchy. Like, yeah, okay, we can pressure them from the other side and we can take the bullets and like take the fall for these white women. They're never going to return it to us. They're like, white feminists are not going to go, oh wow, these conservative white men were so willing to step up and defend us against the transgenders that we really should consider their interests, and maybe we should be more considerate of their circumstances. No, of course not. As soon as that conflict is over with, they're immediately going back to attacking you. Right? The best thing that can happen for us is that allowing the transgenders to do their thing then creates an opening for straight white men to identify as women and get access to female-only scholarships and other benefits and bypass DEI filters. So it makes no sense for white men to oppose the transgender agenda. You should just take advantage of it. That was the argument I was making back then, and I'm sort of saying something similar now, where, if you're interested in defending or in preserving the white race, the first thing that you have to prioritize is removing white women from the woke coalition. You've got to get them out of there. As soon as they are out of there, they will be forced out of necessity to align with you. Because at that point then, you're no longer in a situation where white men are the only outgroup and then everyone else is in a coalition against them. Now you have a situation similar to a minority-ruled government where you have an entire ethnic group that is ostracized from the ruling coalition. Because then it's the men and the women. And that is actually a much stronger basis to develop opposition from. You cannot develop opposition if you're just a guy, like if you're just a sausage fest. There's no continuity there. You can't create families, and you can't create a future for this group of people that you can envision because it's only men, right? The reason why white nationalists never get anything done is because it's only dudes, right? Like you can't envision a future if all your women hate you. And are ideologically opposed to you. You can't envision a future unless you take away all their rights. And it just becomes this sort of pointless revenge fantasy. And as a result, nobody's really committed to these ideas. There's just this sort of nihilistic, bitter cynicism and resignation you see when there's no women and it's only dudes. Because if they perceive the women as betrayers, basically. If you get the women out of that group, you force them back into our group, then you're in a situation where you're just an outsider ethnic group, and then you can actually do like what the Kurds are doing, for example, or other ethnic separatist movements are doing, where you can have an active resistance movement because it is like men and women that both identify with the group fighting the ruling authority, right? Now, I'm personally not really that I'm not that invested into it because my mindset is kind of similar to the divestors or whatever that you see with black women, where I kind of like the way that they think, even though I think that there's a lot of nonsense with that. I'm not saying I agree with them, but I'm saying I like the framing that they have. Like I would use a similar framing where you're just basically divesting from this group. Because there's nothing you can do. Like, if you're a white man, you can simp for white women and remain part of the underclass of white. Like, you can be an underclass in the woke hierarchy permanently, and in order to, not be driven out of society altogether. Or you can be just a bunch of seething dudes in a circle of other dudes whining about the situation but not being able to do anything. And you can maybe shower money on e-girls that come your way. Which actually there was a recent one. Let me pull this up. Hold on. Let me see here. And actually, to some extent, this is what the grooming gang scandal was about. Here we are. So this chick is one of the latest e-girls. She's called Ella Malding. And she's doing a bunch of, like, we need to save the white race posts and whatever. And as it turns out, this seems to happen every single time. And it's so common now. It's like clockwork, where these e-girls, I'm convinced actually, like the only reason why some of these women develop any racial awareness at all is because of their relationships with non-white men. Then they develop an awareness of themselves as white women. Whereas with liberal women, oftentimes you don't see the same degree of awareness that develops because their milieu is only other whites. And so they never develop a concept of themselves as white women and what power they have as white women. They're not as aware of it in their own clique. Yeah, Malding, that's her name, Malding. It's just funny. I mean, it's such a humiliated position to be in my mind, as a man. You know, like, we make jokes about MGTOWs all the time. But MGTOW delusions are still more dignified than this. Velvet Rope and Neegst Sig Nielsen, Yehudis, and early section on Wikipedia. Look, man, I hear that all the time. This is a cope. Okay, this is a cope. There are many, many cases of these women not being from the tribe and playing this sort of game. Like, you saw this was attempted with Lauren Southern. Where they're like, well, her name is Lauren Simonson. Well, yeah, but Simonson, when it's spelt the way it's spelt, it's a Danish surname. Like, she's not actually Jewish. This is just a way of saying it's actually not our girls. There are these secret... there are these people that are attempting to besmirch our women and defile their names when actually they're not doing this. No, there are plenty of cases of this happening. And this is just one example. There's tons and tons of these chicks. Pretty much every e-girl at some point. Again, like, the only reason I think they develop a racial consciousness in the first place is their romantic interactions with men of other races, where race becomes an element of their interaction. Whereas it doesn't become an interaction if they're only dating white men, because everyone involved is white. And by the way, this is probably also why you see a lot of these far-right extremists and white nationalists with ethnic girls as well. I guarantee you this is the same factor at play here, is that you only become salient of race as a white man if you interact a lot with people of other races from a perspective of racial awareness. Like, where you're interacting and you realize that there's a different dynamic due to your race than if they were the same race as you or you were the same race as them. It's the same thing. So you end up, that's where the meme comes from of, we need to save the white race, and then it's somebody with J.D. Vance's face. Let me introduce you to my son Rajdeep, who's half brown, right? That's how it happens, right? Wasps are so gynocentric they destroyed their entire nations for malaise. Hardly a superior trait. Yeah, kind of. There's this book series I want to read. It's called Rabbit Run, and it's by this guy who's a wasp. Actually, I'm gonna look it up. And it's really interesting. I never got around to reading the whole thing. I skimmed through a few of them. Here it is. Rabbit Run, John Updike. And you think, oh, he must be one of the tribe. This guy here. Rabbit Run. So this was written in 1960. It prefaced what happened with the baby boomers and the transformation of American culture, where it went from this conservative culture, relatively speaking, but the conservatism just became completely hollowed out through the course of the world wars. And we know this, by the way. Like, there's articles written about the Blitz on London, and the Blitz was, of course, during the 40s, during the war, where women were just fucking anyone they could get their hands on. It was just, whether married or not. Like, it was just nonstop adultery, abortions, and it was because they thought they were going to die the next day, so they thought, I need to get as freaky as possible. And you saw similar things with the 1920s. But with the Rabbit Run series, it's almost like a documentary, even though it's written as a novel. So it's written like there are characters acting out a novel. But if you actually follow it actually, like, his series of books is like the transition from the baby boomers taking the, at this time, in their minds, completely discredited moral values of the pre-1960s world, like the white picket fence, nuclear family, stay-at-home wife, that sort of thing, and it transitions from that to the sexual revolution. Like, I'm pretty sure what happens is that he's married to this woman who he doesn't like, and then he starts an affair with a prostitute or something that leads him down this road of drugs and wild sex and all this other stuff. And then by the time he does his last book in the series, it's in the 90s, and he's talking about his grandkids being, or it was either the 90s or the 2000s. Here it is. I think it's Rabbit at Rest. Here it is. Yet 2001. It was written, and it was about 9/11. And I remember reading the synopsis of the novel, and it was about how his kids were these ungrateful, or grandkids were these sort of ungrateful, nihilistic, petulant kids that hated everything and that were just disillusioned about the whole world. And it was funny to read it because you can sort of see the transition of the boomer world from 1960 to 2000. And I don't know if there would be any interest in that, like doing like a book review, I suppose, of this series. But it's like, I don't really find it very good writing per se. Like, it's not bad writing. I remember I read like the first half of Rabbit Run. As I said, what was valuable about it is that it's almost like it's like digging up a novel from the late Roman Empire that gives you like the upper middle class perception of life in the Roman Empire as it was like, and then leading up to the collapse. That's what I really like about this series. So I might do something on it. Nords are more gynocentric than wasps. Yeah. Oh, hell yes. Oh, hell yes. No, Nords. And it's really, it's so depressing because you look at some of the things that are happening in Sweden. I can't think of a group of women that is more treacherous than Scandinavian women. Like, more openly treacherous. You'll have stories of Swedish police women getting into hookup relationships with random terrorists on Tinder, and then they become moles and agents for them to get them weapons inside prison and other things. And these are not ethnic women, by the way. Like, some of them were, but there was also Swedish women as well. And then you find, there was this other story I remember seeing where there was this Swedish neo-Nazi that got murdered. And he was actually one of the conspirators in the murder. It was like a bunch of immigrant guys, and it was an early murder. It was like in the 80s or something, or 90s. It was a bunch of immigrants, and then Swedish women. Swedish women were cavorting with the immigrants, of course. Like, every time I hear one of these stories where these women get brutally attacked, I'm not crying any big soppy tears, okay? I'm not. You know? If there's any group of women where the men would benefit more from those women becoming unsafe, it's Sweden. 100%. Swedish men would benefit a lot more from Swedish women becoming much less safe. Mercer, which European country is most likely to effectively combat white replacement in the 21st century? That's a good question. It's hard to say because I'm not even sure if any of them will combat it. I'm skeptical of. I can tell you which ones are doing worse. I can tell you which ones are worse off, but they're all kind of not doing it. Some of them are worse than others. That's really all I can say. I think America has the best chance of surviving as an intact state, and that's only because Hispanics are not civilizationally hostile to American whites, the way that, for example, North Africans and at least some of the sub-Saharan Africans are in France to the French, or like how the Pakistanis are to the English, and the Indians to the English. To a lesser extent, Turks are not so bad in Germany. Like, they cause issues in Germany in terms of they're not as productive as Germans. Maybe they have a higher crime rate, but it's not by a huge amount. they're a little bit like Mexicans in the U.S., where they're kind of a semi underclass, but they don't really cause that many. Like they're not overrepresented in surprise snuggles the way that North Africans are or Syrians are. So and I remember reading somewhere, apparently Germany, if you look at the ethnic European birth rate, like even though they're not Germans, if you include the overall European birth rate in Germany, it's like 75%, which is actually quite surprising. Now that doesn't mean they're going to be Germans. Like there's a lot of non-German Europeans, but I think they're in a better position than France is in, where France is like 35% non-European, and it's real. Like they got a real mess in France. Mercer, you know nothing about Mexicans, La Raza, or the Chicano culture. Mexicans destroyed America, and they're definitely hostile to whites. Well, yeah, but there are whites in Mexico. And as a matter of fact, there's a dominant ruling class in Mexico. So yeah, they might be hostile to you as outsiders. Like they might be hostile to Americans as Americans, but they're not hostile to you as whites. Like most of them want to breed upwards into whiteness because that's how it works in Latin America. Like in Latin America, the reason why Hispanics, you don't see anywhere near as much hostility towards mixing with whites, like for example, white men with Hispanic women, you don't see anywhere near the kind of hostility towards that in Hispanic communities that you see with like Asian women getting with white men, how Asian men perceive it. Which, by the way, I'm not saying is like it's justified. There's no reason why Asian men shouldn't feel that way. But what I'm saying is it's noticeable that there's a deficit in hostility. And the reason for that is because in Hispanic countries, there aren't closed racial groups without any intermixture. Whereas in America, because of the one drop rule, you could not enter whiteness if you had even a drop of non-white, and particularly black blood. So it's a different environment where you were closed off from whiteness. It created a mutual hostility. Whereas in Latin America, you could breed your way into the white population if your other elements of social status were increased. So if you made a lot of money and you were in some way like socially advanced, if you were more intelligent, higher status, like you could marry a whiter woman if you were like a mestizo, and you could have castizo children, and those children could marry up again, and eventually you can marry into the white population. And vice versa. You know, you could go downwards in status as well, in theory. But as a result, there was never this separate group of whites that exists in Latin American culture. They're all on a continuum of the same larger group. And that's what would happen to whites in America if time goes on for long enough and the Hispanics eventually, if you were to shut the border down, and you were to just keep the Hispanics in America as they are now, eventually they would dissolve into the population, and you would see something like a casta system develop in America that that would resemble that of Mexico and these other countries. 100 million Mexican La Raza supremacists, America's future is Mexican cartel hellhole. Well, yeah, they might be a cartel hellhole. That's true. But you're not going to see a targeted hostility towards whites that you would see in England, for example, when it comes to Pakistanis. Like, Pakistanis will always view the white English as an enemy out group, and they will try to eradicate them, basically, if they can. Mexicans won't do that. The amount of Mexican whites is so minuscule, it's absurd to use that as anything meaningful. And yet, Conrad, if you look at the advertising in Mexico and the media in Mexico, it's massively overrepresented with whites. Massively overrepresented. To this day. Okay? It's not the same as... like, even though their numbers are not great, it's not the same as America, where you're just going, or like South Africa. Okay, it's just a fact. Or even Indians. Like, Indians, I would say, are a lot worse than Mexicans because Indians have an active, we're not part of their caste system. We don't exist within their caste system, and as a result, we're always going to be an outgroup. They're always going to see themselves as competing with us. With Mexicans, it's not the case. The whitening castizo theory from the 1900s, dude. Modern mestizos seethe with hatred towards whites. I grew up in one of their barrios in Cali. They're full of shit. Well, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's not what the data seems to show. If you look at the rates of mixing, it's pretty even from both men and women. And as a matter of fact, I remember looking into this. The BMI of Hispanic women that have children with white men, and you can determine this through the CDC Wonder Tool. The BMI is lower for Hispanic women that have children with white men, and the average height is taller as well, which means that the whiter Hispanics are already intermixing with the white population, and they're forming like a castizo population. I mean, Nick Fuentes is an example of this, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that, and I'm not his biggest fan either. Like, there's a lot of things I don't like about him that I'll criticize him on, but I think it's telling that the biggest representative of white interests, even though, you could debate that, but in terms of how the public perceives him, the biggest representative of white interests as perceived by the public is a guy who's half Mexican. So you have to explain this. Now, that doesn't mean that there's going to be no hostility. Of course. Like, Mexicans, if you're not speaking Spanish and you're not part of their culture, they're going to see you as an outgroup, even if you are white or whatever. Or even if you're like another group of, like, if you're not Mexican but you're Latin American, you're also going to be seen as an outgroup, right? I don't disagree with that. I'm saying over a long enough timeline, once those initial first-generation immigrant distinctions dissolve, which they always end up doing, this is what you're going to see. It's not the same environment as what you would see with Indians or with Muslims. All right. And they were openly aggressive. When you say openly aggressive, how would you describe that? Like, you mean they would physically attack you? I mean, look, I'm willing to say I could be completely wrong here because I'm extrapolating from data. I haven't personally lived it. So I am perfectly willing to say I could be wrong. I suspect that I'm not going to be wrong about this in the long run, just because there's no reason to assume that they wouldn't, once the barrier of strangeness breaks down, when they're, for example, when they speak English as a first language or they're kids or whatever, eventually English is going to be spoken as a first language. Once you get to that point, you lose that unfamiliarity that you are used to in the first generation, right? And then you start seeing a different attitude. Whereas you don't see that with Muslims, you don't see that with Indians. They still maintain their ethnic distinction, their ethnic identification as in opposition to you, even long after they've been here. And it's not 100%, it's not 1-to-1. It's not every single one is going to do this, but you're going to see this a lot more because there's no precedent for whites in their culture whatsoever. There's no precedent for whites in India. There's no precedent for whites in Muslim countries. Right? There are precedent for whites in Latin American countries. And actually, I can tell you one other thing that would embolden them to be hostile is this could be partly American influence, ironically. American influence, for example, you're starting to see racial conflict in Brazil. Brazil, okay, everybody points to Brazil as like the end stage of disaster for multiracialism. And there's some truth to that in terms of like Brazil has permanent problems that it can never solve due to the racial composition of the country. But one problem that Brazil did not have until recently was everyone was Brazilian. Like they didn't have subgroups of Brazilians that were opposed to each other and that didn't identify with each other, that saw each other as outgroups. Like with Americanization, you end up with, you need to have a victim subgroup, and then you need to have this victim subgroup get privileges and get moral authority over the majority group. And you're starting to see this now in Brazil with Afro-Brazilians becoming the the oppressed minority group that has been historically oppressed, and they're starting to adopt American racial language when it comes to slavery, when it comes to discrimination. And this is actually fueled, and there's also affirmative action that's happening now in Brazil as well due to race. And it's actually fueled a lot of people to identify separately from, or differently from what they used to identify, where the fraction of white Brazilians has gone down quite dramatically. And it's not because there's been an actual demographic change in the last 20 years or so. It's because more and more Brazilians are identifying as non-white in order to avoid being discriminated against in DEI practices. Yeah, we'll have to see. I could be wrong. We'll have to see. But I think that America still has a better chance than a lot of European countries do, because they don't have a religious opposition the way that... and they don't have a means of preventing their family from defecting either, right? So here, what's the difference between, for example, Pakistanis and Mexicans? Mexicans cannot violently coerce their women from defecting. So as a result, they can't develop a very strong group consciousness, because in order to develop a strong group consciousness, you need to be able to prevent your women from defecting and establish like a coherent community. They can't really do that because they've inherited the European low control over the culture. Whereas for Pakistanis, they don't have that issue. They don't have that. Like they can coerce their women, and as a result, they can maintain. They don't have to be a high status group. Okay, they can be a low status, ostracized outgroup, and they can still maintain their cohesion and reproduce themselves and demographically take over places. Boonhally, I'm seeing what you're saying now. Sometimes the filter can be an issue, but unfortunately that's the only way we can prevent streams from getting taken down. And yeah, I have heard a lot of bad stories about West Coast Californian Mexicans. And actually, as I said, I suspect that Americanization plays a big role there. Because the American regime, as I said, it targets white men as an outgroup because white men are the biggest single potential threat. And California is a stronghold for that kind of ideological thinking. Like I'm quite convinced that if you were to take these California second-gen Mexicans, if you were to bring them back to Mexico, the Mexicans in Mexico would have a hard time understanding their thinking, I suspect. But, and also another thing that I've noticed is that for groups that are less competent, they're less able to compete on legitimate grounds with, say, whites or Asians. They will adopt like a criminal element to their identity in order to maintain a distinction from the white population or whatever population they're in. And the reason that they do this is because it's a core element of human nature to feel like your group has some positive distinction. Okay, if you're for example a North African in if you're a North African in France, let's say, okay, your average IQ is 90, you're not going to be able to compete effectively with the white French in their own economy. So if you just engage in things legitimately, you are going to be an underclass. And as a result, there's no reason for your men to stay loyal to your group or your women to stay loyal to your group. You need to have some distinguishing element that you can point to as something that you're superior to the French at. And being an outlaw and being a criminal is of itself its own its own positive identifier. You know, like blacks are able to do the sort of gangster criminal, like, look how hard ass we are. They don't need to compete with whites economically in order to maintain their self-esteem, because they have this other non-academic, non-economic source of pride in their identity. You know, we're more aggressive, we're more violent, we're more dangerous, we're more masculine, that sort of thing. Probably you're seeing Mexicans to some extent do this as well, because if we're talking like the California Mexicans, you're dealing with a lower IQ population. They're also probably physically a lot smaller than whites. They're not probably physically as powerful as whites, just due to their build structure. You know, indigenous ancestry makes you physically smaller, typically. So this could be a way, like being aggressive and being criminal, this could be a coping mechanism for their identity being sort of an inferior subgroup of whites within white countries, right? Whereas in Latin America, in Mexico, for example, that's already built into the system. You really can't, like the way Mexico and Latin American countries work, it's already designed where on top of the power hierarchy are the white Hispanics, and on the bottom are the black and indigenous, and everyone in the middle is in some area on the spectrum. It's not entirely 1-to-1. It's not like if you're 3/4 white, you suddenly get bumped up in socioeconomic status, but it's a strong association, right? That's already baked into Latin America. So this could be one of the ways that they cope about it, I'm thinking. The Latinx, we become more black, they act more... Yeah, well, it's interesting because America's foundational division is black versus white. And so what you could be seeing is some of them assimilate into the black underclass culture, and some of them assimilate into the white mainstream culture. And that could be really the division. Because, I mean, yes, there are definitely, obviously, hood Mexicans, whatever, that'll be blackified culturally. There's also George Zimmerman types, though. They exist as well. And we have to account for them, right? I think Fuentes is a plant used to put a nice guy face on the Mexican invasion, actual population invading closer to blacks and satanic cartels. I don't know. I mean, I think Fuentes got most of his racial beliefs from his father's side. Like, if you talk to Latin Americans, again, yeah, okay. I think largely this could be a bias because the ones I've interacted with are online and they typically speak English, and that's going to be gated by education. So probably I've been talking to the upper half of Latin America generally, but the impression that I've gotten is that they are a lot less racially sensitive than whites of the same class are. You know, like my mother, for example, it would never cross her mind to do a racism. Whereas if you talk to a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Hispanics, or not Mexicans, but just like Latin Americans generally, yeah, blacks are associated with a certain kind of negative stereotypes, but also the behavior that we see where there's rioting or whatever, this wouldn't be tolerated in a lot of these countries. Well, first of all, if they riot and they blow up their own suburbs in somewhere like Colombia, like the blacks in Colombia are on the coast. If they were to riot and burn down their own communities, no one's going to rebuild them. So they know not to do that because there's no one coming in to save them and fix everything, repair everything. And also on top of that, if they try to do that to anyone else, because everyone else knows that their own shit is not going to get fixed, they're not going to allow it either. Right? How many George Zimmerman types are there proportionally, though? The narco subpopulation? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Oh, I think that's definitely the case in California. But, I mean, you also have, you have different types of Hispanics in Texas. You have different types in Florida. For example, you saw for the young Hispanic, or the Hispanic male population, I think in the 2024 election, a majority of them tipped over and voting for Trump. And Trump was, at the time, he was campaigning for mass deportations. All right, like the Mexican blue shift towards, or blue bias towards Democrats, that's largely coming from Mexican women. Mexican men, or not Mexican, but like Hispanic, because obviously it's not just Mexican. Hispanic men are a lot more middle of the road in terms of their support for the Democrat versus the Republican. Hispanic women are like 70% Democrat, 30% Republican, or less, something like that. So we have to take account of that, right? Fuentes is integrated into WASP Protestant American culture. I don't think so. I actually don't think so. Because Fuentes, if you look at how he interacts with blacks and other races, yeah, okay, he criticizes blacks, and he talks about how he doesn't want to live around them and stuff. That's true. But the difference is he doesn't want to separate from them entirely. Like, he's willing to interact with them, and if they act in a way that he approves of, he's fine with them being around him. Right? That's the difference between Protestants. Protestants, they will categorically reject you from their communities if you are racially impure. Like, that's because that's what it says in the Bible. The Bible is very much a manual for maintaining racial purity and separating yourself from the impure, right? And this is where Protestants got a lot of their racial ideas from. Catholics have always believed in integrating the races, even if it's integration. Sorry about that. Even if it's integration in a hierarchical way, right? So by hierarchical, I mean, okay, maybe whites will be dominant, and Spaniards, for example, in Latin America, they will be dominant in this system, but they're still integrating all these other groups. They're not racially separating them and preventing intermixture. And Fuentes is much more in that strain than in the Protestant strain. And this is one of the areas that he gets attacked a lot for, is because he's so inconsistent on race issues. Right? Catholics are ushering in the Mexican invasion. Oh, maybe. I don't know. I almost wonder if that's better than the alternative, though. Like, you're saying cartel invasion. I think I would want the cartels to make America ungovernable. Like, think about how that would improve the rest of the world. That wouldn't have to deal with American political interference. A Mexican that looks more Mediterranean than indigenous with a BS physics degree, that already very small minority. I like to hang around BP space because this is more interesting than sports ball. Well, welcome aboard, Javier. I've never seen Protestants do that. No, well, it's not something you see now. I'm talking historically. Like, if you look at the Afrikaners, for example, the Afrikaners were in South Africa for over 400 years, or not 400, over 300 years. Pretty sure they arrived in the 17th century, the 1600s. And they are something like 97% white genetically. 97%. They've managed to remove genetic outsiders and keep themselves genetically homogeneous for over 300 years as a white minority in a overwhelmingly black continent. Right? And in addition to that, it's not like there wasn't any race mixing at all. What would happen is that if race mixing happened, it would result in a progeny of that race mixing being excluded from the general community. So if you're half Afrikaner, you could not become an Afrikaner. So they would join like the mixed population that were known as Cape Coloreds. Whereas and there was even this community in Namibia. They were called the Basters, Baster, Basters. And, of course, that's a variant of the word bastard. And this is what they called themselves. And they were a mixture of Afrikaner men and Khoisan women. And they were considered bastards. They were considered outside of the Afrikaner community. So that's how they did it. That's how Protestantism works, because it doesn't. It has a very physical understanding of what Israel is, and they emulate Israel's example when it comes to preservation of their own race. Like, they see themselves in the shoes of Israel as a divine nation, and it was the same with the American Protestants. I mean, there's a reason why you don't see all sorts of mixed race populations in the early Americas. Like the New England colony they did not allow miscegenation. It was grounds for getting you expelled, and it was seen as something immoral. It wasn't just seen as like a social problem; it was seen as like a moral failing. So that's how Protestants work. Catholics were all about, we need to integrate the races together so long as they are religious. Catholic Church was always in the forefront of defending indigenous people from brutality by the Portuguese and Spanish in an attempt to convert them, of course, and integrate them. So it's a different environment. No laws means no interference from the police or feds. We want to do our own thing. Lawlessness would be a great thing. Don't want this government to have any power. I would say, I'm not saying I want to advocate that, because it's easy to say how nice lawlessness would be, and then once you get it, all of a sudden everything becomes 10 times more expensive. Like, the reason why shithole countries are shitholes is because it's so expensive to do anything. Actually, no, this is a good thing to mention. So I was seeing some posts about how libertarians and conservatives and boomers were all saying, well, society doesn't owe you anything, young man. Society doesn't owe you a wife. Society doesn't owe you a good job. And I was saying, actually, society does owe you that, because you have to ask yourself, Mr. Elderly man with a lot of assets and capital, who is a minority in the overall population, who is defending your property rights? Who is ensuring that contracts are being fulfilled, that the rules are being followed, and that you are safe from coercion or extortion by other groups of people, for other groups of criminals from your property? Why doesn't a gang of younger men just go in, take guns, shoot you, and take your property? And then the answer is, oh, that's because laws will be enforced against them. Well, who enforces those laws? The government. Well, how does the government do this? Fighting age men. Fighting age men with guns are the ones who are defending your property rights, defending the integrity of your borders, of your country, and allowing all of these transactions and these contracts to go through. And as a matter of fact, you do owe them some kind of stake in the society, or they will not defend you and yours, because they will have no reason to. Libertarians and capitalists and right-wingers always seem to forget where these things come from. They start the story in the middle. They're like, well, we already have a functioning society with rule of law and property rights. Well, why should I care about these people that are on the losing end of this arrangement? Because those are who ensures your property rights. Because there's no reason why, if you're ensuring that they are not going to be able to achieve any of their life goals as a group, guess what's going to happen? They're going to conclude, okay, we have either no chance of living a normal life if we continue under this system, or we can join the outlaws and we can just take their shit by force. And yeah, probably a lot of us will die from it, but guess what? If we win, we get their shit. We get to take their shit. Guess what happened in Syria with Jolani, the current ruler of Syria? Jolani started out as a medical doctor, or he was a not a doctor. He was a student, a medical student. And he eventually joined a jihadist group. And you think, well, if he was a med student, he was on his way to becoming a doctor, why would he take this chance of joining a jihadi group and like waging jihad and risking his life, probably getting almost blown up and almost getting his head shot off several times? Why would he take this enormous risk to do this? And then you realize, well, if he graduated, he would become a medical doctor in Syria. Okay, and Syria is a third world shithole. It was back then, and it was also controlled by a foreign ethnic group, the Alawites, and the Christians as well. They were in like a coalition controlling Syria. Sort of like how Iraq was controlled by Sunnis and Christians in an alliance. Christians were one of the administrative middlemen classes. Same in Syria. And as a result, Sunnis were largely frozen out of this arrangement. You didn't have the same rights. You had the same rights on paper. You didn't have them in practice in Syria. Well, he decided, I am either going to be constrained to this poverty life as a doctor in Syria for who knows how long, or I can roll the dice. I can roll the dice and join a jihadi group and see where this takes me and see where my ambition takes me. And I think to a large extent, yes, there was a core of religious radicals, and maybe Jolani himself was a religious radical. Okay, maybe he was. But I think a lot of the ISIS fighters, a lot of these jihadi groups, they were largely manned by young men who had no alternative in life. There was no future for them through the legitimate means. So they became soldiers of fortune. And they joined the jihad, expecting to either die or to win big. And guess what happened with Jolani? Jolani won big. Jolani won his own country. Now he's the controller. Now there's contestation. All right, Syria has been blown up. It's a pile of rubble. That's true. And it's not a stable government, but he is in control of it. He is the strongman of an entire region on this planet now. And that's what rolling the dice and taking this high-risk, high-reward alternative got him. Okay, most men, if you can offer them a decent living by living within the system and not attempting such a high-risk gamble, 99% of men are going to not try this. Okay, if the harder you make life for the typical guy and the more out of reach the basic life goals become for him, the higher the chances are he's going to join one of these alternative pathways that are higher risk, higher reward, or better chance at reward. Exact same thing with the cartels. Exact same thing. All throughout Latin America. Why are cartels always full of manpower? Like they always have the manpower they need. Why is that? Because your alternatives, if you're an uneducated, lower status man in Latin America, what are your options? Well, you can either try and get some wagey job that will that'll barely feed you, living in like a ramshackle hut somewhere, and just live marginally for your entire life until you age out and you die. Or you can roll the dice and you can become a cartel member. Yeah, you'll have to kill people and you'll probably very high chance of you getting killed yourself. But if you can survive this thing and you can work your way up the ladder, you can make it. You can become something. You can become something that's not only wealthy by their standards, but also respected. Well, you know, if your living standards are like 1970s America, almost nobody's going to take that risk. If your living standards are current day Venezuela, current day Colombia, well, maybe you will. Maybe you will. So, yeah, that's my take on that. And let me catch up in the live chat here. What do you think of E. Michael Jones' argument, capitalism equals Protestantism? I would say capitalism is just liberalism. It's just the economic side effect of liberalism. You could say that liberalism is Protestantism. You could make an argument for that. I've actually talked with E. Michael Jones before. Not directly. Like I would send him mail, and sometimes he would publish it on his monthly letters or newsletter, whatever it is. Like he does Culture Wars magazine, and he does publish his letters to the author. And one time I did write to him, or a couple times I should say, where I go back and forth on this stuff. But that's something I could do. Maybe I could talk about it next stream because it's getting pretty close to the end here. I can go over a little bit. I'm not on a super tight deadline, but yeah. E. Michael Jones state Protestant focuses on the individual and self-capitalism is an individualistic ideology. It kind of is. Capitalism is a little more than that. I would have to get into it, but it's not a bad inference, but I don't think it's entirely correct. I'll just put it that way. I have guns and most white Americans do as well. I think you can infer your own thing. It would be easy to police women too. Yeah, but things got to get a lot worse. Things got to get a lot worse for you in order to allow that to happen. And the sad part is America is in such an advantageous state in terms of its geographic position and its resources and its lack of external enemies that can threaten it seriously due to its borders, that it would be very difficult. Like, they would really have to profoundly fuck the country up in order to make it so bad that internal disorder could break out. Which maybe they could. Maybe they could. We'll have to see. Mexico isn't that bad of a country, though. It's similar to China in GDP per capita. Yeah, but there's an extremely high inequality level in Mexico, and there's also a lot of instability. Like, the government in Mexico isn't really that functional. Like, most of the police you can call the police, but unless it's a really serious crime, they're not going to be able to do anything. You know, stuff like that. Among other things. Didn't Christianity ruin the genetics of Europeans? I don't think so. I mean, you could argue that it's culturally stripping Europeans of the ability to defend their genetic interests now. You could make that argument. I wouldn't say historically, though. Italian-American hitman was interviewed by the FBI, and when he was asked if he became a gangster, his reply was, "Why should I live a life of mediocrity?" 100%. 100%. What I mean is that it made Europeans far more docile and weaker. Maybe. But I think there's a lot of elements to that are positive, in the sense that if you want to look at what Indo-European society would be like without that influence, and I would not just say Christianity, I would say this is like the Neolithic European influence. Without that influence, if you want to see what society would look like, look at the God-King-dominated societies of the Indo-Iranians. Or the Persian Empire had the Shah and Shah, and the Neolithic majority population was enslaved, and they preserved that relationship between ruler and ruled, even long after the Indo-Europeans that dominated the society dissolved into it genetically. And it's the same in India. The Aryans that invaded and conquered, they genetically mixed into the population, but they preserved that domination-based society. And it's resulted in Indians as they are now. So I think this sort of individualistic and more communitarian, egalitarian norms that emerged in Europe, I think that they were ultimately a lot better in a lot of ways. Like, it created a synergy that resulted in where we are now. Christianity, I think, was just an iteration of it. Like, we would have ended up where we are now, I think, either way. Anyways, though, I'm going to end the stream now, guys. Appreciate all of you showing up, and I appreciate the super chats as well. That was very nice of you guys. I'll talk to y'all later.